in May, and then there'll be another one in June, then there'll be another one in November. So it's a constantly moving number, right? And it will be a big number. Also keep in mind that your district submits calculations about your district. For instance, demographic data is submitted not only by the State Education Department, but by the Office of the Controller, Office of Real Property Tax Services. All these types of data beyond your control are submitted to the State Education website. So your property values, income values, tax rates, everything reside at SCD. As well as the demographics, in other words, student demographics. In other words, how many special ed kids you have, how many general ed kids you have, how many kids go to career and technical education, how many are in high cost programs, all that type of thing. We also look at your external auditor reports to find out what your auditor believes is going on in the district. In many cases, unfortunately for the board, I think the auditor is more like a cross the T, dot the I person, whereby they just want to make sure no one ran away with the money and things are in the right spot. But it's not usually very insightful, to be absolutely honest. It's kind of like doing your income tax, and you get all these 60 pages of who knows what, and you assume everything's okay. So I looked those over, and we could see some trends in there. Then we look at documents of capital expenses and debt. Now, debt is very important to school districts. Debt actually keeps the school district going. Without debt, you wouldn't have a school district probably. And your capital expenses, which are capital projects. But they're also, for instance, if you bought a bus, would be a capital expense, heavy equipment, that type of thing. So we look at that. We look at transportation and transportation aid. We also look at the capital projects data about your capital projects. When, how much did you get back? What does your debt service look like? What is your building aid? So we really tear things apart there. We take a look at your bonds and bond anticipation notes. In other words, all your debt instruments, whether you have short-term borrowings, long-term borrowings, how long they're there. You've got borrowings go back 15 years, which is typical for school districts, by the way. Most school districts have bonds at least 15 years. Some have 20 and some have 30. We take a look at any use of capital reserves if you have them, and I'll talk more about that in a second. We take a look at your debt service schedules because those impact your tax cap. I'll show you that in a minute. All other expense-driven aid we look at. So in other words, your transportation aid, your building aid, your BOCES aid, all kinds of special education aid. I'm going to actually show you what all those are and how they work. We're going to take a look at your tax cap implications and the tax cap in your revenue history. So I went back and I actually recalculated your entire tax cap from the year 12-13 to current, what it should have been versus what it could have been, and what it was, what it wasn't. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at your debt service fund if you haven't, and your reserve. I'm going to go through every reserve you have. I keep in mind the reports of the controller of the state of New York. They call it the Office of the State Controller, the OSC, and we rely on data from the OSC. So I actually went to the controller's office and got data about the district. Now, there's going to be things where the controller might not be happy with the school district, where I, as a financial advisor, would be really tickled pink. And that's because the controller really wants the district to dissolve itself with all its resources annually, which actually, it's a great theory, but unfortunately, that's not. It's like when you got payday, the first thing you do is go cash the check and then go find some place to spend it all. That's how that situation works. Use of funds, appropriated fund balances and unappropriated fund balances. We're going to talk about those. They look like big terms, but they're really easy. The appropriated fund balance is the difference between what you budget for revenues and what you budget for expenses. That's the difference. You don't have to say where you're going to get the difference from. You just got to promise as a board that if you spend out the whole budget and the revenue only comes in as planned, you tap your reserves or fund balances to pay for it. The unappropriated fund balance is a fancy name for your cash on hand. There's a law that actually talks about that, and I'll talk about it in a second. Projected teacher retirement system rates and employee retirement system rates. Now, the reason we're going to look at this is because, technically speaking, it's a big number. Now, the rates for the ERS, which would be non-certified staff, would be cleaners, custodians, bus drivers, folks like that are not certified staff. That system, the rate's going about 16%. So we want to keep an eye on that one. TRS rate's pretty stable right now. But keep in mind that when pension system rates, even if they were completely stable and didn't move, your cost would probably escalate. And that's because the rate is multiplied times salaries. So when salaries go up, the cost goes up, even if the rate does not. Implications of the loss of the federal grants, the CRISA and ARPA grants. which your superintendent just, kindly said, hey, look, we're trying to get off the ARPA grants. What happened was the district had access to huge amounts of funds starting around 21 all the way to 24 school year. So when we talk about the 21 school year, we're talking about the 2021 school year. We talk about the 24 school year, we're talking about the 23-24. But the thing is many districts, what they did is these grants were supposed to help you with learning loss and actually trying to stimulate the economy, period. So what happens is districts did hire extra staff during that period of time. The dilemma comes when the grants go away, but the staff stays. The state education department actually warned districts during that period of time to make sure that they understood that these were for one-time only expenses and that the expenses could not and should not, for the fiscal well-being of the district, remain after the grants were gone. Okay, it's kind of like, your Uncle Louis gave you a couple of bucks extra for your car payments, quit doing it, so maybe you got to change your payment schedule. Determine future expenses and escalations, including salaries and benefits. Keep in mind, schools are people businesses. It's people. It's really, if you look around, basically, the investment in schools is really people. The majority of the budget, huge majority of the budget, is people and salaries. And of course, it translates into program offerings and things like this. Then there were interviews with your business manager and your superintendent. I want to personally publicly thank them because I think I did drive them pretty crazy. We were on this for about 2 months and we went through budgets. I'm going to go through line by line multiple years. So we've got a lot done and they were very patient with me. So that's that piece. So that's what we're going to look at. So it's going to be a busy night. I know the board members, you're probably going to be thinking you're drinking through a fire hose, but you are the CFOs of the district. So here we go. Let's get started. I wish this was bigger and the screen was closer, but this is all we got. So here we go. So this is the reserves up to the year June of 2024. And why do I stop there? Stopping there in this slide, because that's the last official record of the school district. Remember, we don't want to make anything up. We want actual records. And what you've got is a series of reserves. So what I'm going to do is go through the top 2 reserves, which are the workers' comp reserve and also the unemployment reserve. Now, both of these have been funded. The unemployment reserve is funded into this current year. So that's the first time that has been funded in a long time. But I must tell you, many districts, if not all the districts I've worked with, had money in unemployment during that entire period of time. In many cases, it's because when the federal grants went away, the thought was there would be some people who would obviously be unemployed because the grants would no longer be there to pay for them. But you're late to the race, but you got something in there. The workers' compensation reserve is very stable, appears to me to be well done, no problems. The 2 favorite things I like about this reserve, should there something happen in the district? For instance, I've had districts will say where the lift at the bus garage fails and they have to immediately fix it because they need to fix the buses. You could transfer money out of there at a board meeting, right in the general fund to do that emergency project. So it's a nice rainy day fund aside from its intended purpose. So that's something to consider. You also have money in what's called the ERS and TRS reserves. Okay, now you're well funded, I think properly funded, well, I would say probably the ERS, but again, linked in the race on the TRS. So there really hasn't been a lot of fund balance development into the TRS reserve. Keep in mind that the problem you've got, ERS reserve basically has higher rates, but people make lower salaries, whereas TRS people make higher salaries, but there's lower rates. So you have to keep that in mind. And there's formulas for doing this. For instance, the TRS reserve could only increase 2% per year based on 2% based on the cost of the pension system for certified staff. So you're late to the race, but you're getting there. You don't have anything in property loss. You do have something in insurance reserve. You don't have anything in liability.
What's your policy on questions?
If you want to wait till the end, or you can ask me now. Okay? All right, so because we've got a lot, sometimes what happens, I'll answer the question as we go. All right, but that's up to you. So the thing here is that property and liability insurance, I see no history in the district where you actually need those reserves right now. You've got a good insurance coverage, you seem to be able to have everything under control, so something happened, you have enough fund balance, you could probably pay your deductible, things like this. The insurance recovery is always a problem because what happens here is that insurance costs do go up and down, and also you have liability insurance costs that could be put in there as well. And those tend to fluctuate on industries as well. Tax certiorari reserve. You have no tax certiorari reserve. You had one, and now it's gone. And that's good because it's supposed to be gone. You are not eligible for tax certiorari reserve because you do not have a tax certiorari claim. So if you remember, a tax certiorari claim is when the taxpayer says it believes that they were over-assessed and therefore overtaxed by municipalities, school districts, other entities, could be villages, towns, counties, and so on. And they actually challenged these entities in court, and they claimed that they were overassessed, therefore overtaxed. And you would then put money in this reserve, so if they win the judgment, you could then write them the check because you'll be ordered by a judge to do so. Districts that make a mistake with this reserve is when there is a judgment, they don't put any money in reserve. And then when the judgment comes out, they have no money, they have to go borrow money. So they go to people like me to borrow money, they get charged to borrow the money, and then they owe more money plus interest because they didn't do it right in the first place. So this so far, so good. I see a nice trend there. You do have a reserve for employee benefits and accrued liabilities. The long term, what does it mean? It's a reserve basically, and it's in your audit reports, this reserve, by the way, it's calculated in there as well. Your business manager self-calculated, your auditor self-calculated. It's the amount that you would be due in a normal year, in other words, on an average over a 5-year period, for unused sick, personal, and vacation days for any employee upon severance from the district. So in other words, if Rick was working for you here and all of a sudden Rick leaves after a couple, 10 years, and you owe me 10 vacation days, you could take the money out of that reserve. Now, this is a fallback reserve. So what that means is if you didn't have enough money, first you'd go to your budget, but if you were to actually use up all the money in your budget, this would be your fallback position as a rainy day fund. Now, if there was a retirement setup, you said to Rick, I'll give you $10,000 if you head out of here. Could you use that reserve? The answer is no. You could not. But if you said, Rick, I'll give you an extra $50 for every unused sick day as an incentive, then you could. Sick, personal, vacation days, or overtime pay owed. Okay? Now, the next is a bulk of reserves right here. These reserves are very important. You have one of them. It's in blue, the capital projects reserve. You've got $1.5 million. When I see this, I feel good about the district because what it tells me is the district is starting to plan ahead. All districts in the state of New York are required to have what's known as the Building Condition Survey. Remember this, your BCS, we call it all the time. And what it does is it talks about health and safety issues and other priorities that must be met in the district to make sure it maintains its infrastructure. You have done capital projects in the past, and I gotta believe you're gonna be due one coming up here soon. This money is an excellent source of funds. This shows the thinking board when I see this. Somebody had their thinking cap on. So here we go. Why is this so important? First of all, it's a capital reserve for a specific purpose. If you look underneath it in green, these are all examples, and the list is almost limitless, basically, of the kinds of capital reserves you can have besides one for capital construction. You can have a capital reserve for technology. You can have one for classroom furniture. You can have one for equipment. You can have one for vehicles. You could have one for buses. You can have one for buses and vehicles. You can have one for classroom furniture and technology. So you can mix and match. Now, what's so important about capital reserves? These are the best reserves going as far as I'm concerned. These are the that keeps on giving. It allows you to buy something that's expensive, no interest, no issuance fees. You don't have to go hire somebody to borrow the money. They are very valuable. The other thing they do is they offset any local share of any cost. For instance, when you buy a bus, the entire bus is aid eligible, but you don't get 100% aid on the bus. You actually have a ratio. Every district has a different ratio. This can help offset that ratio, right? It can help. Same thing with the capital project. Now, what about capital reserves that makes them so interesting? I love them because they're perfectly identifiable by the public because you can't have them unless the public allows you. So in other words, to me, this is full transparency to the public. The board would have to disclose 4 things for every capital reserve. 1, the purpose of the reserve. And it can't be anything but that purpose when you spend that money. So if it's for capital construction, it can only be, you can't buy a bus with it. In other words, that's what it's for. If it's for classroom furniture, all right, you can't buy a bus with it, just for classroom furniture. So right off the bat, you must disclose the purpose of the reserve. Second, you must actually tell them how big you want the reserve to be. So if somebody says, well, how do you figure out how much you want the reserve to be? Well, it's actually not that complicated. So actually what I would be doing is, and we talked about this during our plans. I said, for instance, hey, if you have trucks, you have a pickup truck, snake rake truck, you got a snow plow, what do you got in that district? When are you gonna replace those? All right, well, you don't want to borrow money for those because it'll cost you a fortune. Could we save ahead? So you would actually calculate over the next 5 to 10 years, how much it would cost to do these things. Now, the key to all this advanced planning is a pickup truck for a school district, maybe 5 years ago, was $30,000. I bought two this year for between 70 and 80. Everybody with me on that? Because they have to be heavy duty and they gotta be able to push snow for a long time. It's not like just any pickup truck. So what happens here is, what you have to do is, I wouldn't want to know on your 5-year plan how much the truck costs now. I want to know how much it's going to cost when you buy it. That makes sense? And then you add up your basic schedule, and that's how you determine your amount. Same thing with capital projects, classroom furniture, technology, whatever it is. Now, the third thing that you must disclose is how long that reserve will last. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever you wanted to do. And it depends on your schedule. In most cases, capital reserves for capital construction go 10 years. Vehicles go 5 to 10. There's no sense in having really anything less than 5. Okay? And all the numbers should probably be close to $1 million or more because you're supposed to have a long range plan. It's not like you're going to buy a thing 3 years from now. Okay? Now, the next thing is that you have to say, where is the money coming from that goes into the capital reserve? So you have to tell the voters, it could be, for instance, a transfer from another capital reserve. So let's just make it up. Looking at your sheet there, you've got $1.5 million in there for capital construction. Let's just say in the next capital project, use 1.4 million of it, leaving 100,000 in it. Everybody with me? And then you want to start, let's say, a vehicle reserve. Well, when you start the real vehicle reserve in the language for the voters, you would say, and we would start this reserve by transferring 100,000 out of the capital project reserve into it. So you have to tell the source of funds. Now, the other source of funds could be state aid that you get or any fund balance. So technically, those are the 4 parts. Now, the other part I like about it is not only is it telling the public we want to try and save up for this to save some money somehow, but the other part is you can't spend the money unless the public allows you to spend it too. So to me, you got to take 2 bites of the apple, which I think is great for transparency and involves the public in the planning. So then you'd say, okay, we want to do this capital project. We want to buy this to us. And during probably either a December time period, usually for capital projects to match up with state aid, or to buy a bus for say mostly in May, you would say, hey, we'd like to buy this bus. We want to expend this much money out of the reserve. Will you let us do it? So therefore, it really keeps faith, I believe, with the community. So I think it's certainly something to take a look at and something to keep in mind. The next one you have is repair for reserve repair. Now, for me, reserve repair, I don't know if I would have put that much money in the repair reserve because we're trying to be honest here, right? Now, there's no harm in putting that much money in there. But my point would be is I'm wondering if we should have, but don't forget, we just got to analyze things over 2.5 months, right? Tearing things apart. So this is, we're going to do a little woulda, shoulda, coulda, but we're also going to do like, okay, what do we do now? So maybe perhaps we might want to start another different kind of capital reserve, for instance, and have money transferred out of there into maybe another use. That would be my possibility. I would suggest perhaps. Because buses are going to get very expensive. I don't even mean the zero emission buses. I mean, diesel buses are getting very expensive. So no matter what you get, it's going to get up there. Trucks are, snowplow equipment, dump trucks are up there. I mean, everything but the kitchen sink is up there. So that's something I would consider. There's no harm in having that money there, but keep in mind, technically speaking, what you want to do is try and do something you can do with cash to get some kind of state support. So when you buy a bus, you get some state support, you get some transportation aid. When you do a capital project, you get state support, you get building aid, that type of thing. So in other words, you double the use of your money. The next thing in there, you have reserve for debt. You have no money in reserve for debt, nor should you. You're not even eligible for reserve for debt. And the reason is because reserve for debt is a reserve that's created when you sell a building. I drive all over New York State doing these things, and you know what? You go to a lot of communities, and they used to have like a couple of elementary schools and stuff. There's a lot of empty buildings all over New York. I don't know if you've ever driven around. A lot of empty, but they turn them into apartments and things. If you sold a building that was student occupied space, and you had debt on the building, you would have to take the proceeds from the sale, put it in that reserve, and then over time, absolve yourself of that debt. So you couldn't put that right into your own treasury. In other words, you got to take care of the debt first. So that's how that works. And then it says other reserve fund balances. You don't have a nuclear power plant here, coal-fired furnace, power plant, so that doesn't apply to tax stabilization because they're starting to close those in New York. So that's basically our history class. Then what we do is we take a look at what are we going to do? Well, just notice there's a big green or yellow block there in the middle there with that 1.5. My guess is you would probably be planning about that time to do a capital project. And if you'll notice, that reserve will then go to zero. But if you notice, it's 1.5 million out of all of your reserves, which are 3.722 million. So that's a big part of your reserve. So you don't have a lot of money in your savings account per se. Most districts your size, that number's probably closer to 5 to 6 million in there instead of 3.7. So that might be something we consider going forward if you have the money. I guess that's what we're going to try and decide tonight. Are you going to have the money? But you also have other money. It's called the unappropriated fund balance. Remember, I told you there's a law dealing with it. It's called Real Property Tax Law 1318. And this is a real bugaboo with the controller. And the controller says that you are not allowed to carry in cash for no intended purpose. In other words, not into a reserve or not allocated into the budget, more than 4% of the next year's budget. If you notice in the middle of that little piece there, you see a whole bunch of red numbers. Those are how much you're over that amount. So that money that's in red should have been up on the top. Now that's easy to say, except the number in red, if you'll notice, starting at about, I'd say June of 21, it's going down. I mean, like a rock, which means you're burning up your own cash. Okay, I'm going to tell you why you're burning up your own cash later on in the presentation. Well, that's what's going on. You're starting to burn up your own cash. You're exceeding the legal limit of what you're supposed to have, but you're still burning up your own cash. So the big question is, I'll count that money when I go over all your finances. The other thing to keep in mind is you do have a debt service fund. It's got $332,000. Now, I am not your financial advisor. I'm here just for this project for you. But the thing is that money there could be used to help you with the next capital project. If I was your guy, that's what I'd be doing. I could show you a way to do that, but that's not the purpose of this meeting. That money could come in handy to offset a tax impact, I believe, in this district. Also, you've got a school lunch fund, and you're doing well with your school lunch fund. I mean, some school districts do not do well, but I must tell you, you are doing very well. So the key thing here is it's capital projects, long-range planning. The timing is important, and your time is actually coming up in the next couple of years. To pull off a capital project 3 years from now, you're going to have to vote soon, like within a year, because it takes 2 years to get them off the ground. Vehicle purchases are getting more and more expensive. I think we've got to have a long-range plan for that. We didn't develop one because I'll show you where your finances are. So it's going to be hard to develop one if we don't have enough money to buy vehicles. And then technology and equipment purchases fall under the same thing. But you got to keep in mind, nothing is getting any cheaper. I know people think about the CPI, Consumer Price Index at 2.8, 3.1, whatever you want to say it is. But that's washers and dryers. Okay, that's not school. So whatever we buy seems to have a higher cost rate to it, especially capital work. The other thing too is keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, that capital reserve that you currently have makes up 40.3% of every reserve on the page. So when that goes, a lot of money's going out the door compared to how much money you have. But I would suggest that repair reserve be altered around. I think you ought to make some conclusions about that. I think there's better uses for that repair reserve going forward. Now, let's talk state aid. State aid is very complicated. I can't tell you how complicated it is. It is just unbelievably complicated. I'm going to focus in on this top 8 right here and this bottom number right here. Now, this is foundation aid. If you look at your paper, it's the largest number on the page. That means you are heavily dependent on that number. This is all the state support your district gets. So we call it foundation aid. The formula is huge and it's very complex. If you'll notice, the district received a 14.7% increase in foundation aid between the 22-23 and 23-24 school year. Now, that amounted to $868,000. So that was a good chunk of change for you. But the next year, it was 0.4%. It was like, I call it chunk change. Somebody said, give you a dime or a nickel. So here's why. Your district has lost considerable enrollments since the foundation aid fund that was created. And over time, you've actually drifted into a status, which at that time was called safe harbors. The formula said you really didn't deserve much, if any, more money because of loss of enrollment in particular. Okay, and there were other factors as well. So that year, they actually didn't give you much. The problem with those two numbers for those who set the years is when you got all that money in the first year, it lulls boards into a false sense of security that they're going to keep getting that kind of money, or that amount of money they got in that first year will easily coast them through a number of years. That's actually a fatal error. So the thing is a lot of times we get lulled into this false sense of security. When you get like not even 0.5% the next year, that hurt a lot. Now, if you notice the next year, you're really going to get like, I think it's 5.2, if I remember right, 5.2. Now, why? This is what's called the governor's run. The governor's run. This is the governor's estimate. How do I say this? At the end of last year, the governor charged the Rockefeller Institute with one challenge for districts like yours to take some of the state aid back. So they came up with a plan to take the money back. Within an hour of them publishing how to take the money back, the governor issued a press release saying she was no longer interested in taking the money back. My guess, I think this is an election year. So I think what happens, I don't think anybody thought it over. And they started saying, how can we get legislators and the governor to go out and take money away from school districts in the election year? And it's not a good idea. So here's one up to 5.2, but not just because it normally would be 2%. But I think you got the other 3.2 for special reason. I have lobbied hard. Actually, I was part of the Rockefeller Institute where I actually testified, and I actually sent them all the data I had analyzed on the 40-page foundation aid formula. And I sent them 20 pages of formula changes. The governor embraced two of them, and those two actually helped your district. One is the updated community census data, okay? And the second one is the updated measures of poverty. They included more measures of poverty other than just free and reduced price lunch. So they use like SNAP, heat programs, that type of thing. So that has helped you out tremendously. Now, I don't know in the next years, you'll notice I've got here like a 4%, because I think what's going to happen is if they can pick up a couple more, like I think your special needs population is probably increasing. If they could weight those kids more, I think you could get more. Now, I don't know if you're going to get more, but I think there's going to be an election year over the next couple of years. So there's a chance to get more, if that makes any sense. So one of the things I would suggest the board do is if you're not really active in, we'll say, your county-wide school boards association, I would get active because you need these people to send you money. So I would actually start lobbying like crazy. Matter of fact, tomorrow will be a good day to start. Okay? And I'm not kidding, because I'm going to bring up another one for you that you got to lobby real hard, because I think it's actually been crooked and terrible. So now you also get high tax aid up there. Now, here's the part that's interesting about high tax aid. When people see high tax aid, they say, well, see, I know they're paying high taxes. Actually, no. That formula came into being 15 years ago, and it was such a boondoggle by the legislature, they decided not to touch it. And that amount has not changed in 15 years because they screwed it up. What they actually did is they didn't give it to enough districts. The formula was flawed. They had a lot of numbers to start sending in to certain friends of legislators' districts. And so what they did is they didn't want to back up and take money away. So that thing has been frozen in that amount for 15 years. If they were to run that formula again, there's no evidence you would receive a single penny. Okay. The next group that's really important to do is the group right here. It's called summer school transportation without summer school, building aid, postings aid, public, it looks like it means excess cost, high cost aid, and private excess cost aid. These are what's known as expense-driven aids. So this is the more you spend, the more you get back. The problem with this is that in many cases, you have to spend the money either by law or regulation, or you need the item. And what happens is you do not get full reimbursement. So what happens is every one of these aids You will front the money and wait for the aid to come in. So you need cash flow. That makes any sense to you. All right, so, so that's what's happening here. So let's just take a look at transportation. Transportation aid goes up and down in districts all the time. Depends upon your bus replacement schedule. Sometimes you buy 2 buses, sometimes you buy 1. Sometimes you buy 1 big bus, 1 small bus. Another year you buy 1 big bus only. Or the year after that, you buy 2 small buses, right? So the combination is almost endless. But it also depends upon the routes, the cost of the drivers, the cost of running the equipment, the cost of replacing mufflers and brakes and every other thing, and, you know, all the people that work there. So that aid goes up and down. But to make it worse, the ratio at which you are paid, in other words, the percent of the cost at which you are paid, changes annually. Okay, and it's based on property values, of which New York City is one of the parts. Your transportation aid ratio, BOCES aid ratio, and building aid ratio probably dropped a little bit this year because rentals in New York City fell apart as a result of COVID, and it finally hit the tax rolls. So we're all victimized by that. Building aid is another one. Building aid is basically capital construction. I think you're all familiar with building aid. So there it's also a percentage of the cost. But what happens here is, and you can start to see some red numbers occur in building aid. See it? That's because your debt is falling off, which means your aid is falling off. The less debt you have, the less aid you get. So the only way you're going to stabilize your tax cap is to do another capital project. In the meantime, you're going to lose your insurance on this aid. And it's too bad the way that works, but that's the way it works. But you do have a BCS that needs to be fulfilled. Now, you'll notice it gets black a little later on, current capital project, because it takes a while for aid to arrive from each capital project. There's a huge drag, usually 1.5 to 2 to 3 years at least. BOCES aid, you'll see the BOCES aid goes up and down. And that's because of the BOCES services you buy. Most of the BOCES services you buy that result in BOCES aid are for your career and technical education kids, as an example. Now, your kids with special needs that go to BOCES, you don't get BOCES aid. They are not BOCES aidable. The aid for special need kids is found actually 3 places. Foundation aid is one, and the other 2 is the public and private excess cost aids. That's where special needs kids aid is. Let's go back to BOCES. So it's career and technical education. It's the BOCES administrative cost. It could be staff development costs you do at BOCES, the technology you buy through BOCES, a lot of things you buy through BOCES, but not everything you buy through BOCES is aid eligible. For instance, printing. Have things printed over BOCES sent back, that's on your dime. No aid, no state support. Now, public and private excess cost aid is for high cost kids. Now, this is really important to understand. A lot of people say, how come they got money left over from the budget? Aren't they supposed to spend the budget? I mean, in other words, the budget was too high. Well, no, that actually is a fallacy. Let's put it this way. If anybody in the room can tell me exactly how many high-cost kids, what programs they have, and how much the program should be in the next 2 or 3 years, and name those kids, it'd be really helpful right now. But nobody can do that. So you have to make the budget big enough so no matter who shows up, you can pay for it. I had Karen's job one time in a district your size, and I inherited 4 $250,000 kids to get my drift for their programs in a single year. Let me tell you, it was not pleasant to our budget, but we had to do it by federal and state law and regulation. So, and besides, these were the most needy kids in the district. Certainly as an educator, you got to say, we got to do what we got to do. Financially, it doesn't help, but that's the way it goes. And that can happen anywhere, right? So that's really could be a high cost. Now, if you look at those high cost numbers, you'll see you're getting a good chunk of change. For instance, let's say public access cost at about 260,000. You're probably spending 330,000 to get it. The private would be like school for the blind, school for the deaf, that type of thing. There's kids now all across the autism spectrum. I actually was a district superintendent of a BOCES. I don't know if anybody knew that. 5th largest BOCES in state of New York, 48,000 kids, 1,800 square miles, 27 school districts. I had an entire pen the size of this, and kids were in wheelchairs, fed through a tube with their own nurse. 200,000 a pop. So it does get expensive, right? But it was very sad for me because I was constantly going to funerals because they didn't live long. It was terrible. Families need all the help they can get, and so those kids. Software, library, textbook, and hardware aid are really small amounts of aid. You'll see red in this at the end of this year, something tells me those will turn into black by the time we get to June. And that's because those are dependent on state, your school district sending it to the state, how much they've spent on these items. And it usually isn't done in full to the end of the year. But you'll notice there is some trend going in red, and that's because generally those are paid per student and your enrollment is not increasing, so chances are those will be down. The one in orange is actually the universal pre-K program. Universal pre-K, this is supposed to be seed money to start the program. Obviously, it's a great program to have educationally, but in most public schools, when they have these programs, the cost exceeds the amount of aid. Now, while they're great to have educationally, the truth of it is they do put a little bit of a hit on the budget. So what happens here is it depends upon obviously who's assigned to it, the number of slots you fill, there's what the requirements for the program and so on. It's in orange because that money does not go into your general fund. It goes into a separate fund. Remember, I already showed you about school lunch fund, right? I showed you about debt service fund and the general fund. This goes into what's called a special aid fund. And therefore you can pay for part of the program out of there, but any part that money exceeds that amount has to be paid for on your general fund budget. So what I do is I'm going to subtract that out of the total because I'm only interested in your general fund budget. So if you take a look at the bottom line there, just above those percentages, you'll see in the first slot of increase is 1.012 million and 570,000. Then a whopping $24,000 increase. What are you going to do with all the money? And then as you go to 26, 27, it's 277, 250. Then the building aid pops in, and then we're back down again after that. So you'll see it does fluctuate quite a bit. So in other words, nothing is static in state aid. So what Karen has to do is basically, by the time you put this budget, hope that whatever she's calculating, it comes true, even though there's no evidence usually that most of it is actually calculable anyway. Other than that, it's no big deal. Now, what we're going to do is run a couple scenarios for you. Now, scenarios are very important. Now, what I mean by scenarios is this. What I'm going to do is show you a couple ways to look at your budget and your finances over time, going into the future now. So at the top of each one, I always have a revenue page first. So this is scenario one. And if you notice, it says estimate for tax levy state cap, and then 2026 and thereafter. So it would be 25, 26 school year. All right, so what happens here is your cap is calculated 2.08. So that's why that number is in there. Everybody with me? Now, the remaining 2.65, 2.5, 2.9, 2.8, we don't know exactly if those are the tax cap going into next year because not all the calculations are present. For instance, we don't know what's happening to your tax base, which will come from the Office of Real Property Tax Services and the controller. We don't know what inflation will be. That'll come from the controller. There might be pilots involved. There might be debt service involved. So these are just basic estimates to get ourselves going. And it keeps the spreadsheet moving. So what we're trying to do here is think of this as a research question. So the research question is, if those were tax increases for the next couple of years, would we have enough money to combine those tax increases with the rest of our projected revenues to keep this district financially afloat? That's our research question. Everybody with me? All right, so here we go. So there it is. So basically, I see a $700,000 basically increase in your revenues in terms of taxes over a 5-year period. So from 25 to 26, 57, 78, and so on, 5 years, starting with this year. All right, so it's about 13.8%. Now, I know everybody's interested in having a 2% tax cap. We'll talk about that in a minute, but this is basically where it looks like it might come out. The next thing I did is I put the state aid in from the state aid page. Okay, so that's just copied over from the previous page, the state aid page. Then you've got your federal Medicaid monies. You'll see it's around $165,000. That's pretty stable for you. Special needs kids in there too. Then we have interfund transfers. Now you'll notice it dropped. And actually, it's my idea to drop them because really, if I had my druthers, all those numbers would be zeros on that line. An interfund transfer, unless it's coming from a debt service fund, which is a separate fund in this, then what happens is all you're doing is telling people you're going to use your own money to balance your own budget. So to me, I wish those were all zeros in the past years and the future years, but you're used to putting some money in, so we'll leave it in, and we'll use some of your own money to see if you still have enough money left to sustain you. And then what we've got is other revenues, miscellaneous others. Now, this is a dicey proposition So Karen has put all your money into high interest bearing accounts, which is great. That's the smartest thing to do for the business official. And so that's great. So you've got, in this year, you got a good chunk of change in interest. Because you can take all the cash you got, put it into a high interest bearing account and gain interest on it. Perfect. The problem we have here with this, we're going to stabilize it, but I'm not so sure it's going to work. But that doesn't mean we can't try. So let's just pretend. Now, if you notice, the Federal Reserve System, we're registered with Securities and Exchange Commission. So I'm always watching those guys at the Fed level. They did not change the federal rate last week when they met. In fact, they kept it the same. If it stays the same, you got a better chance of that stable level. Okay, but if you start using up your money, there's no doubt that will go down and then diminish your rate of increase of your revenues. That's the key phrase, diminish your rate of increase. Okay. Then when we look at it all, basically what we've got is about a 2.2 and change $1 million increase, about 13% of all your revenues. So that's the revenue picture. Now, if you notice, what control does the board have over the things on the page? The only control you have on the things on the page is the blue line. And the only control you have is to ask people to approve it. Okay? You have no control over anything else on that page. Okay? Okay, so what I did is I took those revenues and I put them on the top of the next page. So you wouldn't have to keep flipping back and forth. I thought it was pretty considerate, yes. So here we go. So here we go. Ready? So here we go. So now let's take a look at your expenses. All right. Now what I'm going to do is, for kicks and giggles, I'm going to walk out and get closer to the reading list. So your expenses are divided into major categories. You've got general support, construction, transportation, employee benefits, debt service, and then miscellaneous interfund transfers. So let's take a look at general support. The question you should be asking is, who's general support? General support includes the superintendent, superintendent secretary, the business office, which is the business manager, and the treasurer, and the story. But what's the bigger part of that is all your maintenance, cleaning, custodial, maintenance mechanics, all those people who work in buildings and grounds, inside and outside your building, are also in general support. So what we're looking at here is we're moving from about the year 2025, about $800,000 to about a little over $1 million by 2030. Now, what am I using as my calibration? I'm using your collective bargaining agreements that you have with your teachers unions and so on, your custodial unions or whoever units they're in. Now, other, what is other? Other is basically heat, light, electricity. It could be BOST's technology, it could be BOST's administration cost, but it's also the wax on the floors, it's the paint, it's the drywall truck compound, it's the electrical wire you buy, it's, it could be anything for operations, buildings, and grounds. It could be equipment, it could be everything. Now, you notice some of that is in green. It's in green because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the corral of that line in the budget. That line seems to be a problematic line right there in the budget where the green is. So we're trying to right size those numbers into next year's budget, 26 budget. Now, the numbers that are in there in the 26 budget, by the way, are where we are now in the budget. There's still more work to be done. You still got a couple more weeks before the budget's put to bed. But this is where we were last Friday. Okay, that's where we were last Friday. Now, the key thing here is that you'll notice that we've got some yellow pieces too. These are areas that are problematic. So if we went across to the salaries, we're going from 842 to a little over $1 million, and we've got about $173,000, it's 20%. But then when we go to other, we're going from about 1.18 million, is that I think, to about 1.2, which is going up 95,000, 8.2. And that's actually pretty good because it's starting with a bigger number than the salary. You know, the other is bigger than the salary. Mm-hmm. All right, now let's go to instruction. Now, instruction is the biggest number on the page. It's supposed to be because that's the mission of the school district. In other words, general support is the infrastructure to help run the school district, but the delivery system is in instruction. So it's supposed to be the biggest number on the page because we don't have a lot of widgets here, we have a lot of people, and that's because we've got kids. And if you'll notice what's happening, if you'll notice between 24 and 25 in salaries, you'll notice the green number goes down. Like seeing that? And then it goes down again. Again, attempt to right size your district and put some cuts in there probably is what we're going to end up doing. Now, here's the interesting thing. The interesting thing is who's in instruction. Instruction is a lot of people. For instance, it starts with your principals, guidance counselors, school nurses in there, all your teachers, special ed and general ed teachers, elementary and high school, middle school, whatever. Behavioral specialists, the school psychologists in there. You got everybody in the kitchen sink that's getting a salary from the school district. If the school's like, oh, let's get the salary from policies, he's in the other part. But the key thing is everybody works for the kids in there, but also your coaches in there, class advisors, everybody works with children that's in there. But it's going from 1.198 in 25 to 6.8. Now there we have an increase of about 800,000, isn't it? But you can see it's a good chunk of change because we're starting with a bigger number. And this is what we're seeing so far in the agreements you have. Then the other category is also important in instruction. So the other category in instruction is a lot of the BOCES expenses. So this is the BOCES expenses for special ed, for CTE. It could be the supplies, materials for classroom, could be, the leases for the copy machines, right? Textbooks, chemicals for the chemistry lab, right? It could be all those types of things, basketballs for the PE, you know what I mean? It's everything that isn't people in the entire instruction system. And that's moving from about a little over 2.69 million to about 2.85, 167,000. All right. And then what we do is we go down to transportation salaries. These are bus drivers, these are maintenance mechanics, those types of folks. Okay. And that salary is moving from 553 to about 608, 254,000. And then we've got other, which would be everything connected to the bus garage. So it's brakes, gas, it'd be mufflers and tailpipes and engine repairs and all the rest of this stuff is all in there. And the equipment you need to buy, going from 654,000 to about 922 to 268. Then we get down to employee benefits. The biggest number on the page, of course, is health insurance. Health insurance is starting to be problematic throughout New York State. And the reason is because after, during COVID, a lot of people didn't go to the doctor unless they had COVID, or they went to the hospital and they had COVID, but nobody went anyways. But afterwards, they got their hips fixed, they got their knees fixed, their teeth fixed, they got new glasses, they got their shoulder fixed, they got everything, got their mammograms and their colonoscopies. So what happens, put a lot of pressure on health insurance consortia. They started using up their reserves pretty quickly. So the price there is going from about 2.5 million to 4 million. That's 1.4. So you can see, and then you can see, don't forget, I've got yellow there for retirement Social Security, and that's because wherever there's a salary, right, retirement, remember I told you, even if the rate stayed the same, salaries increase, so does the cost, and Social Security is a function of salary, right? And I think we all pay Social Security. All right, now, debt service is your debt service schedule, and if you'll notice, your debt service schedule seems to move around a little bit, goes up a little bit down, but where the overall increase is about 283,000, and then the other one's 144. Then we see RAN TAN. What's RAN TAN? RAN is revenue anticipation note, TAN is tax anticipation note. What you need to run a school district is cash flow. If you don't have enough cash flow, you have to go borrow the money. Because you can't meet payroll and you must pay debt by law. Okay, so what happens here is that you would have to go borrow the money. So if you don't have enough cash, there would be numbers in there. Right now, you have enough cash to run the school district. When we start looking at 27, 28, 29, 30, the question is, will we have enough money? Will we have to put more money in there to pay interest costs to borrow? And then there's other types of things such as interfund transfers for the school lunch, especially kids for summer school. You really don't have costs there. They're actually included elsewhere. So you're in good shape. But here's the killer. Let's add it up. So when I add up the expenses, they're going from the 25 year of 17.9 million to 21.8 million, $3.9 million. Now, you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar to see what's on the page, so let me help you by going to the next page. Keep in mind, all the numbers that are in yellow, they add up alone to the $2.7 million, just the ones in yellow. So I've skipped some, okay? So you can see your costs are escalating far, far above your revenues. So what I did is for the next page, I brought over your expenses on top, your revenues on top, your expenses on the bottom. Now, let's kind of go through this. Budgets are basically this. If we were to narrow it down to, we'll say, sixth grade level, we would be saying to ourselves, it's money in and money out, right? So let's focus in on the orange line starting at 25. So the 25-year orange line is 395,000. That's money in. The money out is 255. So that looks pretty good. Now go to the 26-year. It's minus 135. And then minus 109. So we see just a tad out of balance here. But we go to the 27-year and the money coming in is 410,000, but the money going out is 703. So everybody's starting to see the imbalance start to show up. And that's because all those costs they give you compound. So if you paid me $100 and then you gave me a 5% increase, I'd be making $105. But next year, if you gave me another 5% increase, I wouldn't be making 110, I'd probably be making closer to 111, right? It compounds, all your numbers compound. So now let's go to 28. We got 391 coming in, we got 861 going out. 29, we got 1,054,000 coming in, 1.5 going out. And in 2030, we've got 500 coming in and almost 1 million going out. Everybody with me? Okay. Now let's talk about this fund balance, carryover, and all the rest of it. Remember, I told you the budget's got to be big enough so that no matter what happens to you, you can survive it. But there's two parts to a budget. There's the revenue part and the expenditure part. You never want to underestimate your revenues because if your money doesn't show up, you're in big trouble, right? It's kind of like thinking I'm going to get a $100 paycheck this week and it only comes in $50 and I plan it on the 100. Now I'm in trouble. So you always want to make sure that you underestimate revenue because as I just showed you on the state aid page, it goes up, it goes down, it goes all over the place. So you just try and do your best not to get hurt. The expense side is the same thing. But in the 24 year was kind of the end of you were trying to get out of the old ARPA money business. You did have some money left. Now, what's that money used for? Somebody's saying, what have we got that money for? Well, here's how this works for those of you who don't know. July 1, let's think of a school year. July 1, who's in school on July 1? Central office is there, the cleaners, the custodians, right? And maintenance mechanics, right? Bus drivers, if you have a bus garage and they're working on the buses, no bus drivers really running around, just a mechanic. Okay, so basically you got that. But you know what else you're doing? You're paying every employee's health insurance, even if you're not there. So you're paying the school's liability insurance for millions of dollars. Covering it for millions of dollars for the past when nobody's there. Then all of a sudden, the last week in August, first week in September, everybody shows up. Now, you're pouring gas in the buses, diesel fuel in the buses, you hired all the bus drivers, you got all the routes going, right? Pretty soon you're gonna be doing more heat, right? Over time, you got electricity going for sure. Okay, so you've got all that going, and you're paying the entire staff. Everybody who works here is now getting paid. Everybody, no matter what they do, they're getting paid. Did you know that your biggest state aid check from New York State comes in the month of March? Your pension cost is actually subtracted from your summer state aid. It's intercepted. So you get less state aid. So in other words, you need money to run the district during the whole summer. And besides that, parents out there trying to buy chemicals, come to farm basketballs and into this, and buy into that, the books and the textbooks and the technology, right? Lining up all the, you understand what I'm getting at. So all this money is going out the door. Now, that 1.5 was good in 24, that was pretty good. But look at 25. At the end of this year, we're thinking it might be less than $1 million. That means the budget has become tighter. Does everybody see what I'm getting at? Because you have less left over. Now, I talked earlier with Karen that she's willing to do her best to try and get that back up to about $1 million in the next 5 years. Now, I don't know if she can do it. She's going to do it her best. I think we're going to all try to kind of like get tighter. But the truth of it is we're going to need that $1 million because you have to have cash flow. Oh, by the way, did I forget to mention that you don't even get tax money until November? So all that tax money doesn't even show up until November. So you're floating everything. And if you buy a bus, you pay for it first, you wait for the aid next year. You buy more postal services, you pay for it this year, you wait for the aid next year. So everybody see how this works? All right, and you have all your debt service going, right? It was in the millions, if you noticed. All right, so then I've got adjustments, use of reserve. Now there's that 1.5 million. Let's say we're going to do a capital project. So I'm going to count that we're going to do that and see what happens. Okay, so those are the two pieces we're gonna look at. Now, what else do we need? Well, there's something called a 4% of expenses. Remember I told you we're over 4%, the $390,000, remember yellow there? Okay, well, now we're gonna right size it, you're gonna get the exact number, you're not gonna be over anymore, because you won't be able to be over anymore. Because what's gonna happen is that's gonna go over reserves, we have to put it there. So now what happens is that blue line, that $711 million corresponds to the expenses in the 26 year. It's 4% of the next year's expenses. So think of it as a diagonal. Does everybody understand that? Now, what is that for? That's the rest of your cash flow. That is, if the top money is mainly for taxes, the bottom money is for state aid or some combination thereof. You need this to pay everybody. Because guess what? When the whole staff shows up in September, you basically have little to no revenue. You're floating everything by yourself. So, in full disclosure, where's all the rest of the money from? Here it is. So we have an assigned appropriate fund balance. Remember, the definition of that is the difference between your revenues and expenditures. Everybody with me? So let's use the 25 year as our example. Everybody follow along. We're going to use the yellow numbers on the 25, starting at the top. Your revenues are 17 million, 16,914. Everybody with me? Your expenses are 17,9. The difference is almost $1 million. Look at the very bottom number under that column. See, it's 980,000. That's what you have to promise that you will pay if the budget is spent out and the revenues come in only as budgeted. So where would you get that money? Easy, you would raise your reserves and you would raise those cash balances. Everybody with me? Now, that's how that works. So that's that box right there. So now, if you look at the next number over next to the 980, you'll see a 1,005,005, 005. Everybody with me? I see it's right in the very bottom next to the $980,000. 1,005,535. Everybody with me? If you'll notice, that number go up to assigned appropriate fund balance and over 1 year backwards, and you'll see it's the same number. See it? See that? That's because you got to promise to hang on to that. So what happens is I have to now start tapping some of your other money. So luckily you've got that 390 in there. So if you'll notice, let's see if I can do this. Look at that. Wow, look at right now. All right, you see this number right here? That includes the 390. You notice how this goes down? That's because this money belongs over here. So you can see it going up. You see the fund balance is going up. You see that? But in the next year, your budget here is more out of balance. See, it's out of balance by more money. So you've got to put that money aside. So in other words, your fund balance, the total money you have is about the same, a little higher. So you built some fund balance because you're going over 1.5 million. You only needed not 1 million. So you can build this all, but the thing is you can't spend that money. Well, look what happens in the next year. In the next year, we need 1.3 million to balance the budget, but you're only bringing over 1 million. So automatically, I know you're going to eat $300,000 of your own money. Right with me? Makes sense, doesn't it? So what happens is now I have to keep that 1.298 same percent. I can't spend it. Now, we still got more fund balance, right? Because we could still balance it out because I keep moving this money over. But now I'm going to run out of that money. So they start looking at future years. Look at this. Now I'm out of balance by 1.768. And I'm bringing over 1 million. Now I know I'm going to eat almost $800,000. Everybody see what's happening here? And let's just keep going. Oh, at the same time, 800,000, I'm going to do the capital project, need another 1.5 million out of reserves. So you can see, I'm going to drop this thing like a rock. We keep going. By this time here, we're out of whack by about 2.6 million, and she's bringing over 1. There goes another 1.5 million. So what do you have left in your treasury? You got $1,772,000 when you start off with 6.4 million. And of that money, technically speaking, listen to this will kill you. Of the 1,772,000 you have, you can't touch. Think about it for a second. 2.6 million of it. See how ridiculous that is? So you are what they call underwater. Colloquial term, but it works. So there we go. And that's where we are. Now, Can you do the capital project? Yes, you're probably going to need to do it to stabilize the tax cap. And you're probably going to need to do it because everything that you don't do the capital project is going to actually cost more if you wait. So this is a real problem. So let's talk about the tax cap because that is the part nobody talks. So I'm going to do a lesson on tax cap. So follow along, don't get ahead of me. This is a story. I'm an ex-social studies teacher. Try and bear with me. All right, so here we go. This is a real district. This isn't your district. I found their numbers easy to work with, so we use theirs. This is from the 21-22 tax cap, theirs. All right, so what happens is the number you always start with on the tax cap is your previous year's tax levy, whatever was approved by the voters. It's that simple. In their case, it was 40 million on the nose. That's why I love this district, it's perfect. So then what happened was you multiply times the tax base growth factor. Everybody see that? That number is a number that could be 1 or above 1. Now, what is that? That is your tax base growth factor. What the heck is a tax base growth factor? That's telling me if your tax base is growing or not. This district's tax base is growing because the number is above 1. Okay? If the number was 1.01, I'd be known and be growing like crazy because don't forget your tax base is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So even 1% is a big increase. But this is a moderate increase. Now, it's multiplied times the previous levy. That's because when they created the tax cap, they thought to themselves, well, if the tax base gets bigger, shouldn't the board be able to get the rest of the tax base instead of the old tax base? They should get the new one. Now, how does that work? Well, colloquially, it works this way. It's Thursday night at Rick Timbs' house, and 4 guys come over to play poker. So we all throw a buck into the kitty. So there's 5 of us in total now, and we have $5 in the kitty. That's our base. That's how much we would get. That's how much we would collect. The tax base is where you get your money from, correct? Mr. 6 shows up just before the first deal. Now, we don't go into the kitty and all take money out so it stays at 5, do we? No, we have Mr. 6 put $1 in because the base just got bigger. There's more to get. And that's what they're doing. The tax cap is telling you your base is getting bigger. Go get the money. Now, they also then add the pilots from the previous year. Pilots, payment in lieu of taxes, usually done by industrial development agencies. Now, pilots basically are collected by the school district, but they're not collected with the tax levy. They're separated out. But the controller wants data from you to find out how much tax money, one way or another, you got. So he's going to add them up, wants to know the number. Then what he does, subtracts the capital levy from the current year. Now that you're planning for next year, what is the capital levy? Capital levy is defined as this. You have a debt service schedule for previous capital projects. Remember your interest plus principal, it was on that sheet I gave you. You take that number and add it together and subtract from it the amount of state support, building aid. The rest of it is called local share or the capital levy. When you pass a capital project in the state of New York, when you pass that project, that proposition must include words similar to this, and levy the tax thereto. It's required. If you had a capital project, you said, hey, there's no tax increase as a result of this, you could be telling the truth, but it goes into the tax cap. In other words, you would have to tax for the money. If this district was to dissolve itself someday, and there was still money owed, the commissioner would appoint a board of education, the controller would come in here and tax everybody out there until that debt was paid. You cannot absolve yourself of the debt. And the reason is because you're selling tax-exempt municipal bonds. They're guaranteed by the residents who voted on the capital project.
Right.
So yes,
Capital levy is also the same as exclusions.
yes, capital exclusion, in case everybody needs to know. Thanks for pointing that out. Sometimes called capital exclusion. Very good. Thanks, Jim. So what happens here is it is subtracted out because we're going to update it down here. So in other words, that $517,000 was supposed to be collected in that $40 million. In other words, they said, yeah, vote on the capital project. We know there's a debt load to it, right? We know that the state aid isn't paying for all of it. We promised to pay for the rest. So they are supposed to collect it. Then what happens is they multiply it times the allowable growth factor, the CPI. Now, you should know, even if you don't study economics, the CPI has nothing to do with anything that we're doing here today. Okay, although it's in the formula. Why is it in the formula? Because somebody thought it was a bright idea and everybody went along with it. And I think we've all made mistakes in our teenage years like that. But the key thing here is this. The CPI is washers and dryers and all kinds of weird stuff, but it has nothing to do with anything you do. But we're stuck with the CPI. And that year, the CPI was 1.23%. So everybody remembers in sixth grade, when you multiply a percent, 1.0, and then you put the CPI, 1, 2, 3. They multiply. Why would you multiply it? Because the people who wrote this thing, the legislature and the governor, said, well, holy cow, if inflation is costing more money for the district, they ought to be able to get more money. So we're going to multiply it so they can have more. Then what we do is we take the pilot, the next year's pilot, and we subtract it. Why are we subtracting it? Well, we're subtracting it because you're not going to levy for it. It comes in separately, right? You don't levy for the pilot. Then what we do is then we go down here and says available carryover 0. Well, if you did not go to the tax cap, there's a convoluted formula that allows you to recapture some of the money you didn't capture the previous year. Now, in some districts it works out great, some districts not so hot. But this district actually went to the cap, so there was no carryover. So in other words, they did what they're supposed to do. Then here, the capital levy for the new year is right here. So now what they're going to do is add it to the cap because they're supposed to collect that money in the tax cap. So their tax cap comes out to be 2.3%. Does that look like 2% to anybody here? No. Is there such a thing as a 2% tax cap? No. Never has been, never will be. I can make this 2% if I lie about some of these numbers. That's the only way I can make this 2%. I've been doing, this thing has been in existence since 1213. I've worked with over 100 districts on this. I haven't seen one come out with 2% yet. Not one. But this one's 2.3. So in other words, they're supposed to be able to collect $40,926,343 right there in the next year. And that means it'll be $926,000 more than the previous year. Everybody with me? Good. Now, what happens next? Well, what happens next is when they actually stick to the cap, what they do is the next year, they start off again where they left off. See it? They start off where they left off. That's all. In other words, you pick up the levy from where you left off. And what I did is I actually stabilized all the numbers so they wouldn't change. And if you notice, it depressed. Remember I said, you want to do a capital project to stabilize the cap? That's what I did here. I did the capital project next year to stabilize the cap. Now it's at 1.6. It's going to be that way probably for the next 5 years. So there you go. That's how this works. Right there. That's how the cap. But inevitably, somewhere this goes off the rails. As simple as this is, that nobody understands it goes off the rails. So here's what happens. Inevitably, at some board meeting in some district on this planet, someone says something like this. 2.3, oh my God. Everybody thinks it's a 2% tax cap. What are we going to do? And somebody else will say, well, I don't know, let's make it 1.99. What can it hurt? Right? This is where the board forgets through the Board of Education, and they turn into the Board of Friends and Relatives and Taxpayers. Well, they forgot their oath. They forgot why they elected. Supposed to be here to protect children in this institution, right? Not for everybody else. So now what happens? Here's how this works. So let's just pretend the board's going to work for me Monday through Friday and do a project for me. And I say to you, listen, if you do a good job in your project, I'll give each one of you $100 each day. Now, if you're like any other average person, the first thing you're thinking of, I can make $500 Monday through Friday. I got this made. I mean, how hard can this be? Here's what I'm thinking. I'm Mr. Taxpayer. Here's what I'm thinking. First thing I think of is, why did I say $100? I don't want to give them $100. I want to save as much money as I can. Now that I think about it, I should have said 100. I should have said some other number. I got an idea. Monday comes, you show me all your projects. I say to each one of you, actually, you did all you did a really nice job. But it's not exactly what I had in mind. So I'm going to give you $90. You are now short $10 each. I have your $10. I get to keep some of the money. I'm thinking, this is working great. You're thinking, we gotta work harder. Tuesday comes along, you work harder, show me projects, I see a list, much better, but not exactly what I had in mind. Here's $90. So now you're short $10 on Tuesday. But you're short cumulatively $20, because I have each of your $20. I have it, you don't. If we keep this up by Friday, the same routine, on Friday, I'm gonna do the same thing to you, I'm gonna say, I know you tried your best, it's just not there, here's $90. So you're short $10 on Friday, but you're short 50 for the week, and I'm sitting there with your 50 for each of you for the week. So I have technically what you thought would be your money. And it's cumulative. Everybody understand it? It's cumulative. Okay? Then I feel guilty. I said, oh gee, I feel terrible about this. Let me give you guys a raise. So you are the CFOs of the district, chief financial officers by law. I'm going to give you a math problem. We go. I'm going to give you a 5% raise. Someone calculate, tell me the raise.
$4.50.
Right. Why do you say that, John?
It's 5% of 90.
It's 5% of 90. It's not 5% of 100, is it?
Sure.
So in other words, I even saved more money again after I gave you the raise. So I'm doing really well, and you're not so hot. Here's how it works. If we had kept the tax cap going, generally speaking, they do tend to stabilize. So what I did is I just showed you an example using that district of it staying stable. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, and I had that board meeting, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to collect the 2.3, I'm going to collect the 1.99. Everybody with me? That means I am not going to collect the 40,926,000. I'm going to collect over here. I'm going to collect over here 40,976,000. You see that? In other words, I'm going to collect 130,000 less. Notice that the difference between this 2.3 and a 1.9 is 0.4%. Everybody see that? It's $130,000. Okay, so now what happens? Easy. The next year, what I do is I don't start my new calculation with where I would have been. I actually depress the levy by collecting less. So my new calculation starts with a number that's less. John's $4.50 example. So in other words, you just lost money twice. Now it's only $2,144. Somebody said, well, it's a big deal. I don't know. It's textbooks, library materials, couple Chromebooks, right? It all adds up. But what happens now? Well, what happens is now this tax cap will be depressed forever. Forever. So here we go. So what I did is this back here is the previous page before where I actually stayed to the cap. And this page is not going to the cap once and staying to the cap the rest of the time. Well, so everybody can see what I'm talking about. Let's just see this. You didn't collect 130,000 right here, right? This is Monday. Tuesday, because your calculation's lower, you couldn't collect the 130 again, could you? And you couldn't collect the Wednesday either, could you? And you couldn't collect the Thursday or Friday. Everybody see that? And you keep getting nickel and dime on the raise, see it? So technically speaking, at the end of Friday, in this district alone, one time, just one time, not staying in the cap by 0.4%, they are behind, let me see if I get this here, $673,000 that somebody else has that they could use to operate the district. But let's make it worse. Look at the bottom line, the next 2 months. If you were to compare the levy that could have been compared to the levy they got, their current levy every year now is going to be $139,000 less than it could be. So they're really $812,000 behind. But it gets worse. What happens if you don't do the cap a couple of times? Here's 2 years in a row. Let's cut to the chase. 2 years in a row. Over here. Now the same district is behind $1.7 million. Everybody see that? Good. This is how it works. There's a lot of factors that go on here. First of all, one of the factors in the tax cap is inflation. You have no control over that CPI number. All the numbers in each one of these is exactly the same, except for the inflation number, and that's what's making this go up and down. Everybody see that? So people say, well, how come it's 1.5 last year, it's 1.7 this year, it's 2.3 this year? In this example, all the numbers are the same except for inflation, and that's how. And you're supposed to try and collect that money. Also, there's pilot fluctuation. When the pilot moves, we've got a real problem here. For instance, this first example, right over here where I've got the arrow, what we've got is the pilot is actually going up, which drives the tax cap down. So here's an example. Not far from you, by the way, in the Adirondack Forest, I've got a district calls me up and says, Rick, wait to hear this. I hope you're sitting down. It's okay, what is it? He says, we're gonna get a pilot for $11.6 million. I said, holy cow, so what are we gonna do with all the money? I said, well, you better sit down. I said, get your tax cap calculation out. He said, I got it. I said, do you know what the schedule is with the payment of the pilot? No. How long is it? 30 years. I was just divide it by 30. Take the number and substitute it for the pilot number in your tax cap. What was your tax cap before you substituted it? We were going up 1.7. Now what is it when you put that in? Going down 2.3. We're giving money back. Pilots will kill them. I just wish people would figure it out. There's other ways to do it than a pilot, if we can get to the idea faster. So what happens is, when a pilot actually increases, the cap goes down because it takes the place of the taxes, but then it freezes you. It freezes you. Then what happens is, I said, okay, 30 years from now, I said, the superintendent and both of us are pushing up daisies. The district's going to be in big trouble because you're going to have like a 12% increase. We actually calculated it would be a 12% increase. How are they going to explain that? It's because when the pilot goes away, what happens to the money that the pilot would have paid? It's in the tax base. You've got to go get it. So I've had a district not far from here near Albany. You know what? You've had these little chip factories and so on. Got a couple of districts that are my clients. I had to go about 5 years ago when I first started. There was a big to do in the community. We're having a 4% tax rate increase in tax increase in the cap, right? But because of the increase in the tax base, people are going to get a 1% tax increase, even though the levy was going up 4%, because there was more base to pay the bill. So people have to really pay attention. But it's up to the board to really start explaining this stuff. You're the CFOs. So same thing here with debt service. So in this case, if you'll notice, in this case, what I've got is debt service going down. It dropped the cap down. In this case over here, I got the debt service going up. So this is where this district should have done this capital project and voted on it this year, not this year, because this is the year the debt hit. It's supposed to hit that year. You got to line it up. This is your tax cap. I recalculated it exactly from 2012-13 to modern day. There it's right there. This is what it would have, could have, should have been if you stuck to the cap. And you'll notice it does vacillate. So somebody can say, why? That's why. See all those red circles? That's either inflation going up or down, or that's debt service going up or down, or that's a pilot going up and down, of which you had no control over a few of those numbers, unless it was capital projects, and this is a timing issue. But you can see it going up and down. In some cases, it's actually below zero. So that's what it could have been. But this is what it turned out to be. So let's just go back here. In 12-13, you basically stuck with the dollars rounding. But in 13-14, the district did not collect $125,000 worth, is it? With a cap. Next year, 3,000. Next year, 19,000. Next year, 98. 76. Everybody see where I'm going? 113. Follow along. You can go all the way over to the end. Last couple of years have been better. No doubt about it. But remember, it's cumulative. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Here it is. That 125,000 occurs now 12 times. So your district is literally behind right now as we're sitting here today, $5,337,000 in tax collection. And your levy is basically right now $775,000 less than it could be right now, which means you're really behind 6.1 million.
Are you gonna expect us to double our levy?
I don't know, it's gonna be up to you. Depends on if you want to have a school district.
We got some
Here
scenarios.
we go, we got some scenarios for you. So even in the last 5 years, I calculated, so that we don't have to go back so far, somebody could say, well, that's ancient history. Even in the last 5 years, it's almost 5 million, 1.459. So my only message to you is, you either got to get to the cap or you have to exceed the cap probably to keep the place going, because in the previous scenario, that's your current budget, you aren't going to make it. So here we go. Let's do another scenario. So now the question would be, and I think you brought up a good question, Tom, what are we going to do? Double the tax levy? No, you could solve this whole thing by going to 18% this year. We're pretty close. It's right here, right in the screen. So there it is there. And what this would do is drive up so that technically your revenues over time do that. Now, this does not mean I'm advising you to do this. But if anybody asks a question, how much would we need to do it? That's what it would be. Because I knew that question would probably come up by somebody, and it's a reasonable question for sure. But then what would happen is, as you can see this, you would still end up with some money. You would actually end up within $400,000 of where you are now. The thing is, sometimes those types of things are not realistic. Okay? Keep that in mind. So we got to have another scenario. What's the scenario? Increased tax and significant reductions in expenses. So now I get taxes at 8%. So in other words, I'm challenging the cap. So now I pick another number. I just picked another number just to make the example. 8%. What does that look like? And if we cut expenses, every place there's a yellow number, I cut expenses. I just cut them.
That's an addition of what we've already cut.
That's right. Right, so far.
As of last budget.
As in the last budget workshop, that's the ones I put in. And if you'll notice, if we're really looking at where we end up, over here, you don't end up with 6 million, which at 5.4, so you're $1 million short. Okay? And then what happens here is, I just put the scenario all on the same page for you, so you can actually start comparing where things are coming from. What I would do is focus in on those red blocks, because you'll notice what's happening is the red numbers, as you move down the scenarios, are getting smaller, right? Which means you're going to eat less reserves and cash. The numbers that are in total fund balance get more robust as you go down the page. Everybody see what's going on? Now, I'm not saying you should get an 18% tax increase. I'm not even saying that at all. It's just someone inevitably must say, you got to be kidding me. If we were trying to recollect this, what would happen? But you could save the place, but obviously it might not be politically palatable. But here, the third scenario is a combination of a bit of a challenge to the cap, and at the same time, it is actually cuts. So this is another, now this is, what was it, 375,000 more cuts than you discussed the last time. So it's a combination of both. You'll probably need to do a combination of both. It's not one or the other. In other words, here's what happens. This is what happens, just like in your normal household. It's kind of like this. When you're flush with cash and things are easy, it goes great. But all of a sudden, those things that you used to do all the time, when you don't have cash, now turn into a luxury out of the blue. That's exactly what's going on. And that's where we are. So let me tell you some recommendations. First of all, the budget's not over. In other words, still more going to be expended, but we don't want to spend any more money. To me, I suggested to the district, they cut all purchases unless it's mission critical. In other words, if you can do without it, don't buy it, because we need all the money we can get for the future. That's A. B, be mindful that I really don't know. You asked me, said, Rick, that number for insurance in the year 2930, is that the exact number? Well, I don't know who's coming and going, but I do know how much you're paying now. I know how many employees you got now without cuts. I know the rate of increase that you've been projected by your insurance agency. So yeah, it's got to be pretty close. Same thing with the salary. Cost of reduction C should be always wait for the kids. Every school district is stealing our even flush with cash should always be trying to become more efficient, more effective, greater economies of scale. What do we need to do? How do we schedule things out? Can we reprioritize what we're doing? Can we do this every other year, this year, that another year? What about this? What about that? School inflation is different than any other kind of inflation, to be honest with you. All right, so what you're going to find is when you start buying things, especially like certain supplies, equipment, material, you're going to find that the fives, it's the CPI. And E, evaluate purchases of staff need. Examine the possibility of attrition and breakage. Obviously, you want to do it all cuts as pleasantly as possible. And what I mean by that is there's a difference between attrition and breakage. There's two types of attrition and one type of breakage. Let's go through it. Attrition is sometimes where Rick's working for you and Rick leaves for some reason. The question used to be probably in this district, who are we going to get to replace Rick? The question now has to be, do we need to replace Rick? Okay, that's it, number one. Number two, right? And in some cases, we might find if we really look hard, it would be nice to have Rick, but we really don't need Rick. Now, breakage is something different. We need Rick. So what's going to happen is Rick leaves, so we're going to have to hire somebody who makes less money than Rick. So we save some money, but it's nowhere close to the amount you save in attrition. So you got to take a look at everything you buy, with schedules, who gets what all the time, and so on, and staff need. So you're going to have to look very carefully. This is going to be very difficult. It's not going to be very fun, but it will be necessary, I think, based on the numbers I'm giving you tonight. Next, note that escalations in long-term expenditures in the financial plan compares to limitations on revenues. You don't have a lot of control. All you can do is ask for more money by challenging the cap, perhaps, hoping that people come with you. But the truth of it is expenditures are really your game here, to be honest with you. It's completely outstripping your revenues. At the current overall budget trajectory, salaries and benefits will overrun the district's finances and any potential revenue gains that you could have in any normal sense. H, failure to act immediately and over the next few years will make it more difficult to sustain the district's financial policy. In other words, the sooner you make these adjustments, the better off you will. If you say, well, what we'll do is we'll do a couple things this year and a couple things next year, and we'll do a bunch more 4 years out. You know, that is actually the opposite of what you need to do. The faster, the better. Develop a long-range plan to prepare for the possible state fiscal cliff. The state controllers issued 2 reports in the last 30 days saying the state will be in trouble past 26, 27. I wouldn't count on the cavalry arriving to help you. Okay? So I would include those, consider a bunch of state aid. And then annually reevaluate your reserve fund balance, because what's going to happen is you're going to start burning it up. Okay? Long financial capital plans help stabilize the tax cap. The thing now is not to let it. So you need that capital project to flatten it. Past capital projects help some infrastructure, but more needs to be done. There's no doubt about it. Recent right sizing has successfully assisted the district's finances, but more needs to be done. In other words, there have been efforts over the last couple of years to get this right, and thank God you did it, or we'd be in worse shape. As bad as we are now, it would have been a lot worse. State aid, foundation aid, the district is currently going to get a 5.2% increase in foundation aid into 25-26. It's hope more shows up in the state budget. There's no guarantee. The district must continue to right-size the relationship between expenses and revenue based on diminished enrollments, trend data, course offerings, class sizes, and other measures. Be mindful that the student needs demographics of the district are also changing as there are more students with special needs. Here's where it gets tough. I know everybody wants extra things for these kids and those kids, but remember, you can't do extra unless you do required. The definition of extra is beyond required. Okay. Next, absent the significant sums of previously available federal grants, which was the superintendent's opening statement, Chris Denard, the ability of the district to sustain immediate COVID and post-COVID staff levels, programs and class size levels within that period, and or create and maintain fund balances currently and into the future are non-existent. All my clients when this COVID came out, I said, well, here's going to be the hard part. If you want to hire more people with the proviso, the minute this money's gone, they are also gone. All of them, unless you trade them out. And do not subtract anybody. Don't start paying your faculty out of your budget and then take them out of the budget. leave them in the budget. That's how you build the reserve and the fund balances. So some districts have better success, some not so high. Number 7, costs associated with zero emission bus mandate are expensive, even with contract transportation systems. Develop a plan to lobby hard. Tomorrow you should call your legislators, don't approve that budget until this emission thing is set back 5 or 7 years, because you don't have enough money, and neither do probably any of your neighbors. This is great to have clean energy. I don't want the kids breathing diesel fumes, the bus driver either. I want cleaner, yes, but we don't have any money. Districts don't have any money. They can't produce these buses fast enough. There's no place to put them. You can't plug them in anywhere. And in some cases, they can't do your routes, depending on your climate demographics, topography. Next, monitor the tax cap. Note the growing use of the appropriated fund balance. That's those red numbers underneath, the difference between your revenue growth and your expenditure growth. Beware of the supermajority limitations. In other words, you need 60%, not 50% plus 1. 9, the distance between anticipated revenues and expenditures has grown significantly over the past few years. The distance between anticipated revenues and expenditures becomes more magnified as expenses escalate faster than revenues. The district has little control over revenues, but significant control over expenditures. The attempt to challenge the tax cap last year was wise. I believe it was wise. If I was there, I would have done the same thing. Matter of fact, I think you guys deserve a lot of it. The district could see the future need for revenue enhancement. It's a smart thing to do. However, the belief that it would save jobs was unrealistic, because I don't think you had all the data I just gave you. Okay? But it was a good shot, but the thing is, it just wasn't going to happen. As the finances of the district were becoming more precarious, you got the drift and you tried your best last year. Kudos to all of them, seriously. It's a heavy thing. If last year's challenge to the cap initiative had passed, it would have helped toward the amelioration of the district's escalating and continuing financial issues. It would have been a big help right now. You know why? Because whatever you went over, remember I told you we're taking the $1 away Monday through Friday? You would have had more money Monday through Friday instead. It would have started turning around the other way. All right, next. It would have represented a positive step in financial improvement, but it would not be enough. But it would have been a great step forward if it had been accomplished. Expense cuts to previous year's budget proved to be helpful, but they are not enough to corral the depletion of the district's strain on revenues to resolve the district's financial projections. As I said, it's money in, money out. So you got to work on both sides of the equation. And I think you tried. One side didn't come through very well. I know there was resistance to the cuts, but again, we'd be talking a worse situation if we didn't have cuts last year, because you would have burned off more cash, the equivalent of those cuts. Immediately and long-term, note that significant decreases in expenses must be made simultaneously with the maintenance of the fiscal structural integrity of the district's buildings. In other words, the roof cannot leak, the doors have to be able to be secure, the kids have to be safe. And that concludes my presentation. And now, because this is a board report, I'll answer questions from the board. Time.
So, when you said, you basically said that the reason why we're in this difficulty is because we failed to increase our taxes. But our tax rate per thousand is comparable to other districts. It's 13.8, similar to Cambridge, Greenwich. And the only district that I know is higher is Fort Edward. I think they're 18, something like that, the Adirondacks. So what is it that got us here besides failing to increase the tax rate?
I think it's the escalated costs. I think it's weaning off the federal money. I think it's a big part of it. In other words, keeping staff levels and projects or costs going beyond. It's kind of like, the feds were sending you money to pay for these things, and then the money stopped. You kept doing these things. So it's a combination of those two things. Now, you are also making assumptions. These districts you mentioned that are not clients of mine are doing just fine. And I'm not so sure that would be true. So it's kind of like this. I'm doing as well as my neighbor. And he's got 5 broken legs. I mean, I don't know. So my point is, it's not a comparison, but I understand your point. But the truth of it is that as you lose enrollment, your efficiencies tend to evolve. You know what I mean? And that's part of a big problem. Class sizes get smaller, but you still have to have another teacher, shall we say. Those types of things occur. In other words, even if you lost, let's just make it up. Let's just say you lost 200 kids in the last 5 years. Building the same size, right? So that means all the space, right? You see the point. So you lose efficiency. Any other board questions? I know there's a lot here. I know there is. There's a lot to think about.
Here's the question. So I think we always talk about the risk of, putting out a supermajority and the roof at the same time and having it really scare folks. And
Well,
we
maybe you
want-
don't do it at the same time. I don't know the exact timing of, see, I'm not your financial advisor. I would want, if I was, I'd look at your capital project separately to find out when the timing would be for that.
So we do have a vote in May, and that 1.5 million that you figured.
Okay, good.
And the debt and the exclusions increasing,
What is the tax increase as a result of the capital project?
1.5.
1.5, right? So that'll play into your formula. Right. And what, there you go. There's your answer.
It sounds like we have a lot to digest here.
Yes, there's a thought of it, yes.
I think that it's important, we all need to understand that when we tried our best to retain, we tried our best to keep, we tried our best to not overwhelm people with letting people go and downsizing and right sizing, I think would be more appropriate. I think we all have to look seriously about other efficiencies and how we can work them in.
Well, it's not like a thing. You're right, Peter. It's not like a thing. It's a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, I think, and I think this is going to be very helpful to us as a board for our knowledge and for our moving forward. And I think it's also going to be very helpful to the community.
Right.
Because they're going to be able to see when we go out and do ask for an 8% increase, it's not because we want to get a pay raise for ourselves.
Well, no, right, exactly. Because you guys make no money at all and you volunteer all your time and effort and everything else.
Rick, can you just mention a little bit about, so as Peter was talking about efficiencies and we have been working on efficiencies, but can you talk about the difference between cutting into your fund balance versus
Right.
true expenses?
Remember that in a budget, remember I told you the budget has to be big enough so no matter what happens, you can't take out the no matter what happens money. You got to take out the expense. All right. So it's like this. I want to take my wife out to dinner every night this week, okay? And I find out I'm going to be broke at the end of the week. I don't cut out buying dogs because I don't have a dog. Okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Seriously, got to cut out something you're really doing. Very good. Well, look, there's a lot. Oh, you have one more time.
Have we seen a small school district like ours go through this sort of reorganizational process and be satisfied with the results?
Yes.
Where?
I ran one, but I had a real different situation. I had 2 school districts I became superintendent of, and in my first week on the job, I could not meet payroll on Friday. Yes, we were really scrambling, and it was painful.
It's up to us to find that.
Yeah, so before that happens to you, then you gotta move on. I think you're gonna move on to revenue and the expense side. Remember, small schools are the most difficult to run because what happens is there's if you had if it was 1,000, much of the research indicates that the best efficient sized school district, all things being equal, would be on a single campus, a single building of between 1,200 and 2,500 kids. And once you get more than that, you become more efficient because you have more buildings and more moving parts, right? And then once you get smaller than that, you have the same types of issues. But the truth of this is a community school. Now, my point would be is obviously the ability or willingness, I think the community has the ability to step up. There's the willingness issues that you got. All right. But at the same time, the district has to do its share as well. Because we are, look, here, I'll be as a superintendent, here's what I used to say to my boards all the time. Let's be careful. I don't want this to happen either, but we are spending other people's money. And they're counting on us to be honest and forthright. And I think that's why we kind of laid all the money out, to be absolutely honest. Because I think what's happening is, my guess would be that the board and your community's been saying, okay, what are we going to do next? And how are we going to do this? And how are we going to do that? Looking at these little pieces, when really we had to look at the whole thing.
One more question.
Sure, go right ahead.
Do you think it's wise, say, we're gonna approach the community with a large increase, supermajority? Do you think it's wise to say, with that, we're also going to make sure that the board doesn't have any funds for training or anything like that? We cut back on all the additional stuff because we want to be leaders in saying that we're not just asking for money, we're also gonna run a very tight ship to make sure we see it through.
Well, there's certain things yes and certain things no. For instance, right now, we're getting an education right now, I hope, right? So the point would be is you want to stay up to date on what you have to do, what your requirements are and things like that. Now, is it that you're going to go to every conference in New York City? Maybe not, if you get my drift. So to me, it's a selection process. In other words, you go through your own budget and say, what do we really have to know more about that we can't let this go? And what can we do without? That's what's going to have to happen through this whole blasted thing. That make sense to you?
Yep.
And you're part of it as well, yes. Yes,
Cost of waiting. If you look at 8% this year asking for, it. We say, we've got a capital project we want to go down, we want to wait another year. We didn't do the calculation, but rough idea, if you wait a year, what kind of percentage are we looking at next year?
then you go to 10, because you already gave up 2, right?
Three, more than that.
Well, exactly, but you see the point. You had to make up the difference.
I think it's important for everybody.
Yes, good point, very good point. Very good point. If you can't do it all at once, you gotta do it in pieces, but the problem is the pieces get more expensive as time goes on, right?
And it will be important, and what we plan on continuing to do is to be updating this.
Right.
Now, this analysis and this plan every single year as we get to the next, once we complete this budget, if we have a few more decreases, which I'll talk to the board about, every year, we've got to, with that next budget, where does that take us?
Yeah.
To make those decisions about, do we stay at the cap? Did we get some retirements? Did we get some breakage or attrition? Where does that leave us for the future? Because we have to be careful, and somebody asked me, and we talked about, these are cuts and that we're making for a while, not necessarily we're gonna raise 8% this year.
No.
And then in a year or two, we're going to be adding back. This is sustaining the staff levels unless we get an increase, correct? Increase in enrollment or a significant increase in
High needs kids, special needs kids, age, calculations change. Now, remember, the 8%, the 18%, all those, they're examples, they're scenarios for you. So they're not to run away with or anything else. But just keep in mind, the longer you wait to make a change, obviously, the worse things get. I mean, it even happens in your own life a lot of times. I knew I should have fixed that thing last year, right? And that's what's going to happen to you. But money has a way of fleeting away.
I have a question that challenges me all the time. And it's a question of needs and wants and investing. And I'm always investing and I always want to promote the school. Last year, we chose to reduce communications and we found out that probably wasn't the best idea. And so in this time where there is change and there are cuts, do we have to selectively invest?
Yes. Well, here's the
And
thing.
where and how?
So, like I said, I've been superintendent of districts where we've run into this thing throughout my career, okay? But this is where here's what I hate to say this, but everybody's different on the way they approach things. So the way I do it isn't the way everybody should do it. But what I did is I went to the PTA president, PTO president, and said, listen, we got to talk. We got some budget issues. And she says, geez, Dr. Timbs, we just had our meeting last night. We won't have another one for another month. I said, no, I actually need one next week. She says, well, no, we only meet once a month. I said, no, you don't understand. We got a problem. I need to meet with you next week. I mean, I want everybody to bring like 5 extra people. Well, we only usually have 4 or 5 people. No, got to do better than that. This is our school. This is going to be important. So sometimes what you got to do is the communication. I was a rural school superintendent. I used to go to the post office every time the brochure came out for the budget or, the mid-year brochure, how the kids are doing. And I would look in the filing cabinet where all of them were kept. It was a big circular thing. And you know what that told me? This is not the way to communicate. This is a way. It's not the only way. I think that's what you got to do. Workshop meetings like this, bring people out. You're able to explain things. I think people have a better understanding of what's going on than they walked in, I hope. Right? They may not like what they hear all the time, but at least they get the truth. They know what's going on. And there's, like I mentioned, transparency and remember on the capital reserves, why it's a big deal to me. The key thing is knowledge is power, but also people have to make tough decisions. Life's tough. We got to go real. And just assuming everybody can do everything everybody else wants isn't just going to happen. So I think there's many ways to communicate, whether it was, I was union president, teachers union president for 10 years. So I had to work with a teachers union. And you think I wanted to have to cut staff and work with the teachers union? No, I was in both things, but I just tried to be honest. And that's what we did tonight. This was full disclosure of your money. I mean, we just ripped apart of your bank account, right?
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. I think if you have more questions, Julie can get a hold of me. I'm glad I was invited. Thank you very much for being a kind and attentive audience. Thank you for the rest of the evening. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Timbs, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Tina's gonna help me find the
I'll
door.
get back in touch.
All right, sounds good. All right, be well, everybody. Good to see you guys. Take care.
Pleasure. Hope we see you again.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, I tortured you. Just.
All right, so
Okay, I think we've got an awful lot of information to digest, both at this table and in the crowd.
I just wanted to just take a couple minutes and just ask the board a few questions related to this.
Good.
Would you, so we have a few options. So we have to know our direction by the 22nd of April. At the latest, that's when we're adopting the budget. And then we have some time to continue to get the word out, make some visits in the community as much as possible. So, I think we need to at least have a sense of the direction that you would like to go in the short term of, I had suggested, Gina had put out some dates to you about having a workshop next week. And then the week of vacation week, possibly on that Thursday. And I know that's, it's a busy time, but I don't know if we need both, I'm not sure, but I would like to just hear a little bit of initial thought. It is a lot to digest. If you have questions, that we're going to take back, Karen and I can take back to Rick either tomorrow or over the next few days if you email them to me. However, I think there needs to be some discussion. If you think you want to go the supermajority route, I will share with you. I just actually wanted to bring up my information here, but I have done a little more work. So we did have, I did share some cuts that had minimal impact to the program budget. As we were putting this presentation together and working with Rick on the final numbers last week, he had mentioned to me, I did say, if you're in my position advising the board, what are your thoughts about in his is, similar challenge the cap and cut more. And I know it's a hard situation for us as the board, and we've been dealing this for 2 years. But the plain and simple, and I appreciate, I think, we can get some efficiencies, but the amount of money, he suggested up there, another 375,000. As you know, we've been cutting for 2 years, trying to kind of minimize the impact when we got to this day of losing all the ARP funds. I'm having a difficult time getting a whole 375 without dramatically impacting programs. So I think, I do have about another 286,000. It would be reduction of a clerical and 2 teachers at the high school that would impact programming in the sense of, a little bit on class size, but we were going a little heavy on some sections, say in math and algebra to have smaller class sizes. The class sizes would still be around the mid-20s, which are not what we're used to, but we can make that happen. We do have possibly some, we have some ability to also make a cut in the English department because we do send 25 to 30 students to BOCES and they get one English credit through BOCES. And the additional pieces in math, they only are required to take 3 math classes, and most students take 4, but not everybody. So there's just a little play in those numbers. It is a little tight. It would require some teachers and possibly in English and/or math to pick up an extra section. They do get paid for that contractually. Historically, we've had it very good because it would be in lieu of a duty or a study hall. So we have historically had a good response to that. Our teachers have been very supportive of those additional classes that we've needed. If not, there would be some cuts to some, but if not, but it would not be all. But if teachers were not feeling like they would pick up an extra class, then there would be a reduction to an AP class in that department. And then there would be one clerical with the reduction of an administrator that allows us to not need a secretary to, an additional secretary. So we'll be reallocating the clerical as well. So that gets about 286,000. I did mention this to Rick. We do have now, again, some of where we were at over the past few years. The decision was made prior, I think, to my superintendency and the beginning of the initial COVID funds, the ARP and CARES Act, to add on some teachers. I think anticipating that there would be some retirements that would allow for those teachers to stay on. And over the past few years, as the board recalls, some of the board members are new, we did offer some additional incentive for retirement, so we just didn't get the retirements that we planned on. So you never know if you're going to get the retirements that may be coming up, but we do have the possibility for, I would say, in the next 2 or 3 years to have 5 to 7 teachers that will be eligible to retire. We do have a very veteran staff, which has been amazing. If they do retire, that 286 with the breakage. So remember, Rick said that we're getting to the point where to cut any more teachers, we're cutting technology or ag. I'm going to be really honest, and I know it's not what people want to hear, or kindergarten. I have to go back to half-day kindergarten. I cannot get teachers any other way because the class sizes won't work. We can't have classes over 30. That is, to me, unacceptable. It's not good for the kids, and it's also not contractually possible. So, I talked to Rick and said, is it, if we can get a fair supermajority, if we didn't quite get that 375 you projected in there, does he think with that potential breakage in the next year, maybe year or two of, so it's about 80,000 that we're off, that we could, I think we can make up of that. Karen and I talked about that. I think we will get some breakage there. I'm not sure there's going to be much attrition left to get really. Our enrollment has somewhat flattened. It's give or take maybe, 5 or 10 here or there from year to year, between 535, 550. I don't see that. We have a relatively steady class size. We get students in, but then we get students out, maybe not in the same grade level. So I feel like our foundation and our state aid is going to be relatively flat unless they change the formula to favor us. And again, we are starting to see the poverty factors weigh in. So I'm not seeing a lot of revenue. So I think we have to get as lean as we can. I do want to let the board know that I met with the unions and the union presidents on Thursday and Friday, and we did talk about that we did stop any non-essential purchases. Now there are always things that we are going to need, and we certainly are not at the point where we're going to sacrifice programming or, task review and preparation for end of the year. But, really being very mindful of what we need to purchase from now until the end of the year. That helps maybe get that fund balance that he showed you, that was about 980,000 fund balance. Hopefully, maybe we can get it to 1 million, but we don't really want to go low. We're hoping to not be below that number. Now, unexpected expenses can occur, but I have those three. My next step would be is to work with Rick on if, I need an idea of where you think you might want to go, so I can run the numbers and bring those next week.
So last year I voted on 12.9. I pushed, I wanted 12.
6.9.
We did do 12, 6.9. However, I've been mulling over this discussion for like a year, and first things first, mergers don't happen. They don't get approved, they're a mess, they're ugly, and we don't want that. Two, if we allow this to continue, bad things will happen. We will lose valuable people, we will hurt the community, we'll hurt the economy. And three, this is our school. And so we don't want to set ourselves up to realize 5 years from now that we really made a mistake. We don't want to do that. We want to start to address the mistake now, or address the issue now, so that we can have the school we want. And I think we just have to continue to communicate and fight for and advocate for public education, that this is our school, and if we want it, we have to pay for it.
I just want to make a point about mergers, so, I think that nobody, really wants to think that's where we're going. From the first talk of a merger, you're talking probably, 3 years would be as everybody's everybody's for it. Yeah, there's studies, there's votes, there's all kind of preparation needs to be done. You're talking that, like, usually there's one of the communities votes it down, talking maybe 5 years, 7 years. Yeah, and in the meantime, you still have to find time to make that happen, and I don't think we're there, but I'm just saying that for anybody, just so people know, you can't say, oh, let's merge and next year it's happening, it's just not happening, so we have to look at always number one, sustainability for what do we want. I think it's important as we're going through this, is that we're out in the communities talking about this, is also hearing what they want. For the future. And so I think we can do this. I think we can be lean and mean for the short term, over the next few years, and build our fund balance and right size. And, there's all kinds of things that can happen if the stars are aligned, but it'll probably be somewhere in between. But it is a lot to ask of 8% of the community. And, we do have to get our roofs done. And it is important for everybody to understand that that's part of this whole scenario, the cash flow scenario with pulling that 1.5 million out is important, how it changes the exclusions and repayment of debt and is favorable to our revenue. There are so many pieces that make the timing of this important. So we do want to make sure that everybody understands, and we cannot have leaking roofs. And every year that we wait to repair the roofs, it's going to cost more money to replace them. And right now, he recommended, looked at our repair reserves. If the roof goes, hopefully we can reallocate some of that, but I'm not comfortable doing that until we're certain that we're breaking ground on those roofs. That's kind of quote breaking ground because they're above us, but that's the term, breaking ground on those roofs, and we're starting that, and that we don't need some of that money because we have every roof back at or beyond our useful life, all of our flat roofs. Our slate roofs are okay for 10, 15 more years, but we have to start saving for those as well. So just, I do want to be clear that my recommendation is that we need to continue to have the capital project and the vote as part of this scenario. That's my recommendation.
I've got two things. Number one, first, for the community.
Is your mic on?
Yes. for the community, at no point in any meeting, either in public or in executive, has the discussion of merger been brought up. So I think I sense some heart palpitations going on out there. That has not been brought up at all and is not being considered at this time. Secondly, would it be, I think it'd be beneficial if we would get, some scenarios from you on what you're looking at to bring this number more to to more in line. Where are we looking at the efficiencies? What, so that we can have the options put in front of us to mix A, B, and C.
The scenario is that I cut one clerical and two high school
Okay.
teachers, one math, one English, to get to 286.
Okay.
The only other option, or if this, if we can't get a super majority number that we're comfortable with, that will work over the next few years. So we can talk about, if you think 8 is a good number, I'll get the exact numbers. My scenario is not gonna get you the reserve amount in the fund balance that he has unless we get some breakage in the near future. I feel like we will. If we cut tech, which would be, again, not what we want to do, but again, it's tech or ag. And I see people upset, but there is no other option. There is no other place to get it. And we have cut almost, I think, 15 people over the past 2 years. I don't have anywhere else to get this. You take 20 here, 50,000 there, all of those things that we have left are cutting into the fund balance. There's
Understood.
because you saw where we just had 1.5 million fund balance and this year we're down to 900. That's because I've already been cutting for the past 2 years.
I don't think we can delay a whole lot longer. John pointed out last year, 6.9, that was gonna get us, that was gonna make up that lost money. And we didn't do that last year. We didn't do that last year, and this year it becomes 8. If we wanted to make it,
But that was also, there's nothing, we're still gonna do those cuts.
understood, if we want to make a perfect world, as Tom, you're saying, we want to be able to retain everybody, keep everything exactly the way it is, yes, we're at 12.9, and this year it'd be 18. So, I mean, I'm sitting as vice president of this board, I would not want an 18% tax increase. I'm sorry, that's awful steep. But as I said, as Sean pointed out, 6.9 would have made up for those years that we said, let's make friends in the community and not make educated students.
But we would have still had a cut this year.
But now we're looking at 8% with having to make those cuts. So,
I want to highlight the importance of having this meeting. So we developed an engineering program through our tech department, and it is going to be the highlight of our school, or one of them. And now, we've completed long-term planning, and now it looks difficult to keep that program. And that's the importance of long-term planning. We have to be able to see what's happening years ahead, so we can spend money wisely. And so we're gonna maintain this approach long into the future. We have to have Rick here every year.
And that's something that I've mentioned to the board is that, again, we have to be wise in our spending and, what Karen and I have done. And so a couple other things is, there are some things that we should not cut because we purchased them through BOCES. So one of the things that you do not want to decrease is your BOCES aid. So if I cut things out of the BOCES budget, the following year, the BOCES aid decreases. Now we've just created a decrease in revenue. So the idea is what we've been doing administratively is we've been sitting here trading things out. So if we say, okay, this is something we no longer need or utilize, or we can do it differently. And so we're trading out things without increasing significantly the BOCES budget. So our BOCES budget is increased due to their increase in costs in some of the areas, but trying to trade things out. So, for example, we have a data warehouse that we may trade out with a different data warehouse that's a less expensive, that allows us additional money. So we have a financial analysis package as part that we use, and we're gonna trade that out so that we can keep Rick on. So that he can work with us every year on our budgets as we're kind of working through them and going out. So I agree, and we've talked about keeping him on, but we're trying to trade things out, and so not significantly increase our cost. But this is important. I mean, we have to get this right, and he has done this. He's helped many districts out of their situations. One of the local districts is Fort Edward. We worked with them. I mean, we all know that they struggled. Theirs was different. We don't have any pilots, payment in lieu of taxes. They had some of those that happened, and that, you know, among some other situations to their tax base over the past few years. And they are lean and mean, but this year they have a good budget year.
Yeah.
But you are also, and I think in comparison, and I think pay attention to the news. It's not for me to share the other situations of surrounding districts, but end of last week, this week, you're gonna see a lot of budget workshops that like this, that are really starting to talk about their situations. And I don't think many of them are where we are in terms of being able to have a long-term plan to make us at least feel like we have a way out of our structural deficit. So you're gonna see a lot of districts are struggling right now. I think, was it last night or the day before, Coble School, Richmondville, is in a very significant situation. They were on the news, so I'll talk about that, but there will be some local districts as well that you're gonna hear on and off, where everybody is in a situation. It may not be that they left as much tax levy on the table. Hindsight's 20/20. Those boards, you know, at the time, they thought that was the right thing to do. But as we've talked about, we can't leave any money on the table. No matter what you leave in, you know, if you leave 100,000 on the table, 50,000, that's $500,000, $1 million 10 years from now. We've got to think about now, not only now, but the future.
I would like to learn more about Fort Edward, because I know that their rate per thousand is like $18, while ours is 13. So they've taken, they've raised, didn't they do a raise, a substantial raise their tax cap, because they chose to not merge with South Bend Falls.
No, I mean, like Rick said, every situation's different. We need to look at our situation and what we can raise in our tax levy. Our community and our tax base is totally different.
But they were faced with the decision to, and I would like to learn from that event, when it comes to our situation.
We're
They
also,
have you think what I'm proposing is a lean staff and lean situation? That they are far less
We're also-
facilities crew, they have far less facilities crew. They have one principal for their entire operation. That you want to talk about lean, they're lean. So they did a lot of what they did out of changing how they spend their money, because as Rick said, there's the revenue situation is on the table. That's our revenue situation. We need to focus on how do we have a reasonable control of our expenses. Our health insurance has increased this year was over $300,000, 300, maybe 30, 350,000. We thought it was 22%, just lowered to 15%, and we thought that was a gift. We're proposing a 2.08% tax levy increase to increase the tax levy by $150,000. That's not even half of just our health insurance, not other salary and benefits. That's not inflationary increases to contractual services, materials and supplies, gas prices, overtime because we can't find drivers that we don't know about. We could get a high-cost student, a residential student is $250,000 to $300,000. Someone could move into the district that costs us that much. We have to have that money available. So the bottom line is we have to get to a point where we can reasonably anticipate and have a little coverage for those expenses, but we can't we can't change the revenue side. We're not a business. There's no way to change the revenue side. The tax base is kind of set agriculturally. There's not the opportunity for retail, tech and economic development, growth as in other communities. So, I mean, there could be discussions and talk about that, but the bottom line is there's not much else we can do except for try to give a great education. We're really trying to put our niche on. We're finding some cost savings to bringing back some special ed students and creating programs here. I'm hoping that will be, we already have another district that is also financially having some decisions to make, and they were creating programs to save money. They're possibly eliminating programs. We already have maybe 2 students committed to tuition in. Now, over time, we may see a steady rate of tuition that we can count on. I'm not willing to bet on that quite yet. So we could get that steady rate. I hear Vermont supervisory unions are restructuring, might affect MediWeek. Could that help us? Possibly, yes. We could see some return. We lost a lot. That's my understanding. I wasn't here, but my understanding is we lost a lot of tuition students when MediWeek went secondary, but I don't know. Like, we can't bank on that, but there are things that could turn in our favor. But the bottom line is we have to plan right now in the next 3 to 5 years of being lean expense wise. That's my recommendation. That's my recommendation.
John can patiently wait.
Oh, I've got a lot to say. Yeah, no, there's no question that we have to run the school in a lean way. You're looking for something to plan. Financially, I think something around 8% we'd have to look at. So I think we need to look at that. Politically, is that gonna fly?
And so-
7% was close a year ago. So am I ultimately gonna say 8% is the right number? I need to hear from the public and hear, am I hearing more support than a year ago? Less support than a year ago?
No,
For that kind of number. But 8% is the number I want to put out there to everybody and think about what that means. And can you go in and vote yes for that? Knowing what's at stake, knowing what Rick says is at stake here, which is really the next 5 years of, do we want the school to be what we have seen the school be? Or do we want to have to cut ag or tech or art for our kids?
I was hoping the teachers would sell last year, but.
Well,
no, we can't,
we can't change last year.
we can't
change
sell it,
anything
but it
else.
was very close. But I think there is an importance of educating the community and putting out
Yeah.
enough information so that people know more about it. And it was a few votes last year. So
So it is a matter of educating information, and that's what we will do. We here are making decisions for the district, and we have to respect both the yes and the no voters, their money, and we want to do it in a way that never puts the vote at risk. So if you get a yes vote, we want to give our information and educate everybody in the way that will then support, hopefully, a yes vote. But we don't want to be challenged so we want to make sure that, I think the word sell would be possibly problematic.
We have to remember that this is a kind of an insular community, and it's a microeconomy. And if you start firing staff members, that's gonna be felt in the community. And it's just gonna be this rolling ball down the hill. And we have to think of the whole thing, our community, our school, our staff here, and we want to protect what we have. And how much do we care about it?
We want to, yes, so we are going to inform.
We do, but everybody also only has what they can afford and recognize that there are people who are gonna say, I can't afford that and I'm not gonna vote for it. And we do have to respect that. That's a perfectly reasonable position for someone to have, that I can't afford to pay 8% more in taxes. I get that. It's not easy for me to feel like I can pay 8% more in taxes, and I know there are people who struggle more than I do.
And on top of that, we
So-
also have an aging community, so
So-
the enhanced star is something that impacts us a lot more than a younger community. You know, I'm the first to admit that I take advantage of my combat veteran status. And that doesn't help either. So,
But that's why we have to tell them that so much of this community depends on the school. What percentage of this population relies on the health insurance of this school? I'm sure it's a very large percentage. Everyone knows people who are employed by the school.
I just think part of our job is to put before voters the opportunity to choose, right? To choose, I'm willing to pay to keep the kind of school we've had, or this is what I'm willing to pay, give me the kind of school I can get for that. And I feel like our job is to put that to the voters and let the voters decide how they want to decide on that.
will this packet be available to the community?
Yeah, so Rick just gave us the information shortly before he came tonight.
Oh,
So Gina will be
One of them.
tomorrow, so she will post the video for the workshop. In addition, she will post the PDF of the presentation of the documents. I did see some people taking pictures, so you will have the full document that and the video. We did have a little problem in the beginning changing over, so I did get in on the recording on the first slide, but the introduction is not there, but I think it is we've got all the slides, all the detail on there. The one thing I would say too about the vote, if the board chooses to go out at 8%, remember that, you know, we're hoping that it would pass, but if there's a failed vote, we do get one more chance before we have to go to a contingency. So I think that is a, you know, a good thing.
Well, these are all things that we have the plate in front of us, we can chew on this thing. So I think that, as I said earlier on, we're not gonna make any decisions tonight, but we're certainly, I don't think, I've been fed with a fire hose, and I didn't
Right.
do that.
So the one thing I would say is, so right now our tax, our allowable levy is 2.08. If we went out around an 8%, that's just about another 6%. About 1% of our tax levy is about $50,000. So it's looking at about $300,000 spread across the tax base. And, you know, I can run the numbers and we can talk about, you know, I think the other piece is at our next meeting, and I don't know if the board wants to discuss this or not, but as I go out into the community and Karen and I go out, and hopefully some of the board members would join us to talk about the situation, why we're making the decision to go out at 8%, what that helps us do financially in the future. I always get the question, well, what happens if it doesn't pass and we go to the 2.08%? And the board has to make the decision, do we stay the course with only those 3 additional cuts and try in the future, but you're eating away $300,000 of fund balance that's going to take our, you know, so he had us in about 3 years, no cash. That'll probably buy us just maybe another year. So that we will have to make some decisions, and I'm not sure if the board will want to do that or not. You know, I can give you the merits of each of the cuts and what would be on the table. And I don't know if you want to hard and fast say if it doesn't pass, these are going, but I think people sometimes want to know, well, if I don't vote for that, what could happen? And there's no easy answer.
If there's energy, if people are engaged, if people want to see it pass, if people are just shrugging their shoulders, not caring, don't really want to expend the money, we can't try it, we can't risk it. Right? If there's clearly no engagement, nobody's showing up, then how can we possibly go after a second supermajority? You can't. We need engagement, we need people showing up.
And I think people need to know what the consequence of
Yeah.
not accepting the vote is.
We have a different.
Like, I think we
have a
do
different
need to
set of
have that
numbers from
contingency
Mr.
set up in
Schuler.
front of us.
We have a different presentation, we have a different,
Well, now we have the future forward.
yeah, and we've got, I mean, we have that long-range plan, we have that look forward, we have the idea where we're gonna go. Last year, I think that there was probably, well, I'll speak for myself, there was some misunderstanding at this table, on exactly what we were doing and exactly, and so when, you know, the 6.9 didn't pass the first time, it was, I don't want to call it a knee-jerk reaction to go to the 2%. It wasn't a stretch of the imagination that way. But I think that we didn't have the numbers in front of us to be able to say, well, look, we're asking for 6.9 because.
Well,
We
but
do have the
we
numbers in front
did
of us.
say, because people wanted to save those jobs.
Understood,
And-
but we didn't,
We would still be cutting those jobs this year after we
Yes.
told them we wouldn't.
we didn't have the numbers last year. We do now. We do now, and we have the understanding, I think I love the way he explained how the tax cap was figured out, because, I don't know, I think you really need to have a master's in math to understand how New York State came up with that idea. And I think he explained it very clearly, but tax cap is nuts. It's insane. There has to be an easier way to do it, but I know that the legislature's not gonna find it. We have the numbers in front of us. We have the ability to now look at the community and say, look, here's why we need this. Here's what's happened in the past. Here's what's happening in the present with health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. We have that in front of us, and to say that if we don't get it on the first vote, that we just throw our hands up and run for the woods is, I don't think a good idea.
Well,
But-
but if I'm just going to say, consider, as we talk about this, if you don't the second time go out of the 2.08, then you're at 0, and you're talking even more. cuts.
Understand?
So I will not, I'm not gonna recommend going over the 2.08 and then risking going to 0,
Well,
which would be another $100,000. That's another person.
let's not put the cart before the horse.
All right.
Okay, let's decide what we want to do for the first vote first. And let's not go into this with negative attitude.
No,
Can we look at this in more detail in regards to not just like bodies or people, but how are we trying to position ourselves strategically? Like, yes, we're cutting, but are we still fulfilling our strategic mission? Are we still an attractive place to move, to bring your children to, and to raise a family? That's important to me. We can't give that up.
That's important, but I think that we have to maybe get involved more with the community because there's not the infrastructure to bring more families here. I mean, our housing market isn't through the roof. There's not a lot of housing here. We need more of that, you know, people who are at the town level, on the town boards and things like that. We need to be building, doing things here in the community that will be able to bring more families here.
We have to
Because
do
we
our-
don't have that ability right now. And I love Salem and I grew up here, but I mean, the realistic thing is that we can't support a lot of families coming here.
I think all the cuts that have been made to date have been made with the intent, at least, of trying to maintain what our students experience in school.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe we haven't done that perfectly, but I think that's been the intent, and I think that is the intent. The thing is, that gets harder and harder to do, right? At some point, it becomes impossible to do. Unless we can do something to actually have the funds to do it. And that's where I look at it, and I'll look at these numbers more, but first look through it here anyway. What I see is 26, 27 is a big problem. It's the start of a big problem. It's a big problem every year thereafter. It's not a single year that's a big problem. Right now, we've got 2 years lead time on that date. And I think if we could get 8% and continue to be really aggressive in trying to save where we can, I think we have a chance to save our students' experience, which is what I want to do. If we don't, right, if the community says, no, we can't afford that, which I can respect the community saying that. I think the reality is we have to start saying, okay, what is the student experience that allows us to maintain? And then that, those cuts, whatever that is, I think do have to come. I think those are discussions we have to have. And that may mean no tech, no ag, no art. It may mean all three.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, I don't know. But I think we need to look at that and say, what is the student experience we can maintain if our community is going to say,
If
no,
no,
we
then,
can't afford this.
if no, then what?
But what is the risk? Will my kids remain in the school if we lose those programs? It's probably doubtful. You know, and that, we have to ask all these families.
Yeah, but we can't make money that isn't there.
And we have to have cash to pay our bills. We
And-
don't get, if you run out of cash, we use all of our cash by the end of the school year, we don't get any payments until November, when our October-ish aid payment comes, we get an aid payment in October, so, right? And then our taxes in November. Start, yeah, but the full tax levy.
You will month.
And the bills are coming, and we need to pay people. So how many people will want to work here?
Nobody.
So, you know, but I'm just saying it's a balance
Yeah.
of how we're doing. And it's an impossible situation.
It's a dual mandate.
And, you know, to me, this is about survival of the institution, this place that everyone loves and cherishes, the traditions that are here, and I think we can do it. So I'll run the numbers on the 8% with the additional 3 cuts. I'll run the numbers on that, and then, you know, at the 2%, I'll kind of tell you what that could look like, that we, you know, if you want to talk about that or not. I just know that I'm going to get asked that.
No,
When I'm in the community talking to people, they're gonna say, what if I vote no, or what if we can't do this, what happens? And I feel, you know, the community is asking us to be straightforward, and it is hard to hear, but I think we owe it to them to say this could happen if it doesn't pass. I think that's important, so people know the options, so that they can be informed.
And I think last year you put something out where you showed the projected effect on someone's taxes, or about how much per year it would affect them. Can we do that again? Yeah, I think that's important to see.
So we had tentatively, I'm not sure where we landed for next week.
Everyone can do the 8th, Peter, no.
I prefer them, I can do the April.
Prefer the 9th.
I think it's important to have
I
everybody
cannot do,
here.
I won't be here on the night. Yeah.
I'm here on the-
We'll have a
I'll
meeting.
do, I can do the 8th. I can make it work.
And then what about the 17th? And then we'll see back for that. Okay, so we'll plan on the 8th and the 17th because even if, I mean, we could, if we think we're at a place where we can approve the budget, then we'll do it. But we may have next week some other questions that you may want us to go back and run numbers on.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's a good scenario to run the numbers on the 8%.
Yep. Anything else?
I want to let people that are here talk if they
That's what I
want.
was just gonna do.
Okay.
Okay, we beat this horse. I would like to invite you, the community, to come up and share their comments. Again, if you have a question or a comment, we will state your name and then tell us what you're thinking. We will write it down if we have enough common questions. We will put together a frequently asked questions section that we'll try to get on the website as soon as we can, and make available. I would ask that the hour is getting late, to try to keep your comments to the 3 minutes that we have.
Wyatt Coburn. Hear me? 7 votes. 7 votes last year. This board and superintendent sat on your hands when the community came and begged you to go out and ask for more money. and you sat on your damn hands and said the community will never do it, and we can't go out and have anything to say about it. And now we're here talking about how we're gonna educate the community. 24 months too late, by the way. The community knew better than you last year. The board did nothing. Why should we trust you? Why should we think that you're gonna get this done? Where was Mr. Timbs last year and the year before that? Why do you think you know now how to do this and you're suddenly gonna educate the community? Y'all better think about why we should trust you to do this job. If you continue to just cut, you will cut. This is the biggest employer in town. You're cutting the community's ability to pay the taxes that you need to run the school.
Hi there, I'm Misha Dubernoy. I was feeling really encouraged to hear you, Julie, saying that you'll go out and speak to the community. I agree, I didn't see that last year. We had a board member who said, will you be at Stewart's when people are getting their coffee? Will you be there? Are you willing to go out and talk to the community? I was. I posted on Facebook. I saw one other board member, not the person who asked if I would be at Stewart's, who also posted. I didn't hear people going out to the community. So I really hope that people follow through on that this year and educate the community on what we're asking, what we'll lose out on if we don't do that. Thank you.
I wasn't gonna go up tonight, but I'm aware that Cambridge just cut their whole tech program. And I really appreciate you guys always thinking outside the box. I've said that a million times. There's so many different ways that you can even just cut a little bit of time, like quarter, 3/4 time, something, instead of just axing a program. Once a program's gone, it's very hard to get it back. So these choices are pretty impactful. When you see our grade and Salem is, acknowledged as a good school around here. I own my home and it means a lot to keep the school here. And so I appreciate the nickel and diming. I know that takes in a lot of hours, but I appreciate that. I don't appreciate whacking a program like that, just to make quick money. And I know you guys don't do that, and I appreciate that. I appreciate everything that comes out as like a flyer, like we talked about. We were only 7 votes off last year. Across my street, the 2 parents didn't come vote. That's 2 voters. Could have just crossed my street. So give us a chance. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Janelle. I homeschool those 2 guys in the back. So I'm not in the school and I live in Jackson, so I don't have a Salem post office box or anything. I get no information. So we've been here for a while, like he's in 3rd grade with my oldest, and we've been homeschooling all along. We've been in this district all along and have never gotten anything. So regardless of how people vote, regardless of their political leanings, regardless of their opinion on all of this, if we do want people to show up and we do want to educate the voters and the taxpayers, I don't know what the solution is, but there's definitely people out there who aren't even hearing anything. Like I heard about this from a screenshot that my friend sent me of a post on Facebook. So, but it's there, but there are people out there who are not getting reached at all. Thank you.
Hi, Rachel Armstrong. I have to run. My son's texting me, asking me when I'm coming home. I just kind of want to reiterate something that Tom mentioned, that parents in the district are not going to want to send their kids here if there's no good programs, if the music is gone, if the art is gone, if there's no AP options. I think that I would murder my kids and they would murder me if I tried to homeschool, but I'm not, I also can't send my kids to a school where they're going to be crammed into classrooms with, 35 other kids because there's not enough English teachers. I don't want to send my kids to a school where there's no more band and chorus concerts, or there's no more drama club. So I would be happy to pay a lot more in taxes if we can maintain a really great school. I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. So it's gonna be a hard sell to have a lot of cuts and ask for a ton of money. So if there's a way to guarantee to the community that some of these programs that we value and cherish are gonna be maintained with these budget increases, I think that would go a long way toward getting people to agree to vote for a big increase. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Mayor. My name is Joe Miner. My son is a senior this year. There is a major lack of communication. Ms. Adams, we were at the meetings with you last year in Hebron when you're like, hey, we need this money. But the numbers that you're presenting to people was at almost the last minute. Like, there's so many factual numbers that we saw here tonight that if the community was presented with this, they would have a different perspective. At least, like, hey, this is what we can attain, or this is what we can maintain, or what we can't do, right? So we've already seen the cuts come to the arts program, the music program, with pushing it to after school, right? Pushing some of the students having to go to after school to take a chorus class, or what's next, a band class, all those things that I raise music kids, I raise art kids, I raise science kids. That's what's important to me. So that's what I see. Your level of communication to the community is really terrible. It's hard enough to find when a concert is on the school's website, what time it might be, let alone anything else. So when you go to the community and you say, I'm out there in the community and I'm telling them this is what we need, it's not factual. That's not, I can say, that's not how the people I talk to think. There really is a disconnection between what you do and what we pay for. And a lack of transparency with both the financial numbers and where we're at and where we're going. I lived in Southern Louisiana. We're a 26-year military family. We lived in Southern Louisiana, the lowest tax rate in the world. It was great. Barely paid any taxes. The roof leaked. The teachers weren't paid. They had almost a 30% dropout rate from 9th grade to seniors in Morgan City, Louisiana. When you give people the facts and the information and are honest that you talk to them and you're out there in the community, that's where it's going to change. And I agree with Tom. If you cut music, tech, and drama club, all those things, guess what? Families are going to boot. They're going to be gone. They can get all the basics somewhere else. But there are people that already drive here from Massachusetts, take part in other art stuff in our community. So people will move. So your lack of transparency and lack of communication is one of your biggest issues. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marissa Perkins. I just wanted to take a moment to say I've been in this district for 7 years. One of the reasons that my husband talked me into moving here was because of the school, and we knew we wanted to have children. By the time our kids were school aged, it became very clear that this was not the type of education we wanted for our children. My son went to UPK here. I had a beautiful experience, but it became very clear that programs and offerings were not what we wanted for our kids. However, we have since moved our son to private school. I have a daughter that's coming into pre-K. I don't know what's going to happen next year, but I can say that we want our kids to go to Salem. We want to be a bigger part of this community. We want to stay involved. We want them to be educated here. That's one of the reasons we bought the house. But I think education is so important. I make an effort to come here to try to attend, to try to stay up to date on what's happening. because we're kind of in a pickle where we're paying private school tuition and we're also paying school taxes. And our hope is that we will pay the increased taxes in hopes that there is a vision, that there is a direction in which things are going to get better. Sure, it might be tough in the short term, but what is the vision? What is the hope? I know nothing can be promised at this point, but to have a vision of what I'm committing my tax dollars to would be super helpful. And a reality of this is what's going to happen if this doesn't get passed, I think is super helpful. Because as someone who does pay a private school tuition and taxes, do I always just want to jump at an 8% tax increase? No, of course not. But if it means that the long-term plan is going to be that the education is going to improve, the school district is going to improve, and my children can graduate from Salem, absolutely. So I think communication, and not just on a surface level, is so important to really be detailed with all of the residents, and outside of Salem, in Salem and outside of Salem. I live pretty close to downtown, and same thing, didn't hear anything, didn't see anybody. And I think just making yourselves more available for questions. I don't really feel like I can approach anybody here if I had a question. I'm not even sure how to get a hold of you other than, digging around the school website and things like that. So I think just being more familiar with the community, I think would be super helpful, and just being very transparent. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Nugents. I began my school leadership career many years ago in the state of Maine. And an administrator in an adjacent district said, Mike, you have to have long-term planning or you're throwing potatoes. That didn't make any sense to me until he told the story of two fishermen who were operating on low expenses. They didn't have a fathometer to see how deep the water was. They didn't have radar to see where objects were in a fog. So what they did is they brought a sack of potatoes and they would reach in the bag and throw a potato as far as they could straight ahead. And if they heard a splash, they kept their course. And if they didn't hear a splash, someone had to decide, let's go left or let's go right. You've acknowledged the absence of long-term planning. Several of you have been on the board or in your roles for at least 3 years. Rick Timbs is your fathometer and radar. But as Rick said, you're late to the race. Others before me have spoken of the potential impact of cuts. Your revenue source is largely children. When you lose enrollment, you lose state aid. When you continue to make cuts, the district becomes less attractive for people who are looking to move and relocate to secure a sound and effective education for their children. And it's a vicious cycle. People are leaving, and you're not making it attractive to welcome people here to the school. Yogi Berra once said, it's deja vu all over again. This is what we did last year. And I'm not alone tonight in suggesting that this board did not invest itself in passing that 6.9%. You've got to speak to anyone who will listen. Go to the volunteer fire department and speak. Go to Rotary. Go to any organization that's willing to listen. Identify your largest taxpayers and personally give them the figures that you have tonight to show them why their taxes are at the level they are and what you're hoping to do. But it takes more of a concerted effort. It means scheduling something on the day of the vote that night to attract parents in, a concert, an art show. And you can't decide that a week before the election. You've got to want to do this and show people that you've accepted the leadership and the responsibility that goes with it to ensure the future of this community. And it's going to take more than you did last year. And that quick retreat from 6.9 to 2.9, think of the difference in what that would have done to address the issues that we're facing tonight. Accountability, transparency, and using whatever political capital you have to engender trust and the integrity for people here tonight and others to sustain this. Because Peter, it doesn't matter whether the board's talked about merger or not. If you keep on cutting and cutting and cutting, you're going to paint yourself into a corner and it won't be your choice. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. No? No?
I'm
Sorry?
sorry, quick. I don't like public speaking. My name is Catherine Coburn. We've lived in town only about 4 years. We've only known this mess. Last year we were guilty. It was our first time going to BOE meetings. Our child was sick for a couple of years. We weren't able to participate in the community. I was blown away, last year. So other points that people are saying is, I got caught up tonight when you said when Karen and I will step out into the community and go, interact with the community. Where was that last year? Where was Rich last year? Where was this urgency last year? I left last year's meeting calling my husband saying, I think we need to put the house on the market because we would have never moved here had there been no school. We are talking about pulling our children out and going to private because I'm not going to let them be into a withering situation. My biggest point right now, which I know kind of doesn't have to do with the budget, but has been told to my husband by members of the board, is you have a lot of convincing to do to get your contract extended for the next 2 years. Words out.
If there are no other comments, thank you all for your participation. We have heard your comments and we'll take them seriously. I hope this was an informative workshop for you as well as it was for us.
Good job.